Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Harold Grimwood, and I've been a park ranger for 22 years. I've seen bears tear apart campsites, found bodies frozen solid in blizzards, and pulled drowning kids from icy rivers. I thought I'd seen every kind of death Alaska could throw at a man. I was wrong. It started with a radio call that cut through the static like a knife. October 15th, 1959, just past midnight. I was sitting in my cabin at park headquarters, going through paperwork and drinking coffee that had gone cold hours ago. The radio crackled to life. "Base, this is Lewis. Oh God, it's got me." Lewis Ashcroft, 24 years old, fresh out of ranger training, eager as a puppy. I'd sent him up to the research station 3 days earlier to check on Dr. Morrison's team. They were studying some old burial site the locals had found. "Lewis, come in. What's your location?" Static. Then a sound I'll never forget, a wet, tearing noise, like someone ripping apart a raw chicken. And screaming. Not the quick scream you hear when someone gets hurt. This went on and on, rising and falling like a siren. "Lewis!" The transmission cut to static. I tried for an hour to raise him again. Nothing. I loaded my truck before dawn. Extra fuel, emergency supplies, my rifle, and enough ammunition to stop a charging moose. The drive to the research station took 6 hours on roads that were barely more than animal trails. With every mile, the temperature dropped another degree. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No birds. No squirrels chattering in the trees. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. In 22 years of ranging in Alaska, I'd never heard such complete quiet in the wilderness. The research station sat in a clearing surrounded by massive spruce trees. It was a simple log cabin with a radio antenna poking up like a skeleton finger. Dr. Morrison's Jeep was parked outside, covered in frost. Everything looked normal, except for one thing. The front door was hanging open. I parked 50 yards away and approached on foot, rifle ready. My breath came out in white puffs that seemed too loud in the silence. The wooden steps creaked under my boots as I climbed to the porch. "Hello, Dr. Morrison? Lewis?" No answer. I pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Copper and meat, and something else, something rotten. The main room looked like a slaughterhouse. Red streaks painted the walls in spiral patterns that made no sense. Furniture was overturned. Papers scattered everywhere. And in the center of the room, arranged in a neat circle, were pieces of what had once been people. I'd seen death in Korea. I'd pulled bodies from car wrecks and plane crashes. But this was different. These pieces had been arranged with care, almost like a twisted art project. A hand here, still wearing Lewis's ranger ring. A foot there, the boot neatly untied and placed beside it. I counted 4 sets of score remains. Dr. Janet Morrison, her graduate student Kevin Walsh, Tommy Clearwater, the local guide, and Lewis. My boy Lewis, who'd called me Sir, even though I'd told him a dozen times to just use my name. But here's what made my blood run cold. The bite marks. I'd investigated enough bear attacks to know what they looked like. Bears grab and crush and tear. These marks were different. Clean, almost surgical. And mixed in with what looked like animal teeth were marks that could only have come from human mouths. Someone or something had eaten these people alive. I spent the rest of that first day going through the station with the careful attention of a man who'd been trained to read crime scenes. What I found made less and less sense with each passing hour. In Lewis's pack, I found his journal. The last entry was dated 3 days earlier. "Tommy's been acting strange since we opened that burial site. He barely talks anymore, just stares at us with these hungry eyes. And he's gotten taller somehow. I swear he was maybe 5'8" when we started, but now he's looking me in the eye and I'm 6 feet even." Dr. Morrison says, "I'm imagining things, but I know what I see." Also, he ate his dinner raw tonight, just picked up that fish we caught and bit into it like an apple. When I asked him about it, he smiled and I could see his teeth have gotten longer, sharper. Asterisk, I tried to radio base tonight, but all I get is this howling sound that almost sounds like voices. Tommy just laughs when he hears it. Asterisk. I found Dr. Morrison's research notes scattered across her desk. Most were about the burial site, apparently some kind of sacred ground where Athabascan warriors had been buried centuries ago. But the final pages told a different story. Day 3. Tommy Clearwater's behavior has become increasingly disturbing. This morning I found him outside our tent before dawn, just standing there in the snow without a jacket. When I asked if he was cold, he said he couldn't feel temperature anymore. His skin was ice cold to the touch, but he showed no signs of hypothermia. Day 4. Kevin recorded Tommy speaking what sounded like 3 different languages last night. When we played it back, Tommy claimed he couldn't remember talking at all. The languages included what sounded like Old Athabascan, French, and something else, something that made my skin crawl just hearing it. Day 5. Tommy can smell fear. I know how that sounds, but when Kevin got spooked by a noise in the woods, Tommy immediately turned to him and said, "You smell like prey." I'm writing this while Tommy is out hunting, as he calls it. If something happens to us, whoever finds this needs to know, we disturbed something we shouldn't have touched. The graduate student Kevin Walsh had been recording audio notes. I found his tape recorder smashed on the floor, but the tape was still intact. I rewound it and hit play. Kevin's young voice came through the tiny speaker. Day 5 at the site. Tommy's been gone since this morning. Dr. Morrison is getting worried, but honestly, I'm relieved. There's something wrong with him. Really wrong. A pause then. Wait, I hear something outside. Footsteps. The cabin door opening. Tommy, is that you, man? A voice answered, but it wasn't quite right. Too deep, like it was coming from somewhere far away. I'm hungry, Kevin. So very hungry. Dude, there's food in the cooler. Help yourself. Not that kind of hungry. The recording dissolved into static, but underneath the electronic noise, I could hear something else. Chewing. Wet, methodical chewing that went on for nearly 10 minutes before the tape ran out. I found Tommy Clearwater's body last, or what was left of it. He was in the back room, laid out on Dr. Morrison's cot like he was just sleeping. But his skin had turned gray as old wood, and his limbs had stretched out until he looked like a scarecrow made of human parts. His face was still recognizably Tommy, but his mouth had split wider, revealing rows of yellow teeth that belonged in the jaw of a shark. And he was still moving. Just small movements, his fingers twitching, his eyes tracking back and forth under closed lids, his chest rising and falling with breath he shouldn't need. When I leaned closer, his eyes snapped open and looked right at me. "Harold," he said in a voice like grinding stone. "You came." I stumbled backward, nearly falling over a chair. Tommy's eyes followed me, but the rest of his body remained perfectly still. "I saved them for you," he continued. "I wanted you to see what I've become. What I had to become. Tommy, what happened here?" His mouth stretched into a grin that showed far too many teeth. "We were so hungry, Harold, lost in that storm for 3 days with no food. And when Kevin got hurt, when he couldn't walk anymore." Tommy's tongue flicked out, long and black. "Well, waste not, want not, I understood then." Tommy Clearwater had eaten human flesh to survive, and something ancient and hungry had crawled inside him as a result. The locals had stories about such things. Creatures that had once been human, but became something else, something that could never stop feeding. "Where are you now, Tommy? I see your body, but where are you?" "Everywhere the wind blows," he whispered. "Everywhere the snow falls. I'm in the trees, Harold. I'm in the darkness between the stars, and I'm so very, very hungry." The body on the cot stopped moving. The eyes stayed open, but the light went out of them like someone had turned off a switch. That's when I heard the howling outside. The howling wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard. It started low, almost like wind through the trees, then rose to a pitch that made my teeth ache. When it stopped, the silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush a man. I grabbed my rifle and checked the windows. Nothing moved in the clearing, outside. But I could see tracks in the snow. Huge tracks, like something had walked on 2 legs, but with feet too long and narrow to be human. The tracks circled the cabin, Over and over, like whatever made them, had been pacing around the building for hours. I tried the radio. Static. I tried my truck. The engine turned over once, then died. When I popped the hood, I found that something had chewed through the wires. The bite marks were the same size and shape as the ones on the bodies. I was trapped. Night fell like a curtain, and that's when the real horror started. It began with voices calling from the woods. Lewis's voice, young and scared. "Harold, Harold, help me, I'm hurt." Then Dr. Morrison, "Ranger Grimwood, please. It's got Kevin. You have to help." I knew they were dead. I'd seen the pieces, but the voices sounded so real, so desperate, that part of me wanted to run outside and help them. The rational part of my brain kept me inside with my rifle across my knees. Around midnight, something started tapping on the windows. Not random tapping, a pattern. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, SOS in Morse code. When I got up to look, I saw a hand pressed against the glass. Lewis's hand, still wearing his ranger ring. But Lewis's hand was in pieces in the main room. The tapping moved to the next window. Then the next. All around the cabin, that desperate SOS signal, like the dead, were begging me to let them in. I lasted until 3 in the morning before my nerves cracked. I couldn't stand the tapping and the voices and the feeling that something was circling the cabin like a shark around a sinking boat. I grabbed my rifle and a flashlight and stepped onto the porch. "What do you want?" I yelled into the darkness. The woods went silent. Then, from about 50 yards away, something answered in Tommy Clearwater's voice. "I want you to run, Harold. I want you to give me a good chase." My flashlight beam found it standing between 2 massive spruce trees. It might have been Tommy once, but whatever stared back at me was something else entirely. 9 feet tall, thin as a fence post, with arms that hung down to its knees. Its skin was gray-white like old snow, and its face was Tommy's face stretched over a skull twice the normal size. When it smiled, I could see rows and rows of teeth. "I've been watching you, Harold," it said, taking a step forward. "Learning about you. You were in Korea, weren't you? Lost a lot of good men there. I can smell their deaths on you. Tasty memories." It took another step. "You sent young Lewis up here alone. Sent him to me. Does that make you responsible for what happened to him?" "Lewis knew the risks," I said, but my voice shook. "Did he?" The thing that had been Tommy tilted its head like a curious dog. "Did he know about Wendigos, Harold? Did you tell him what happens when men eat men in these woods?" Another step forward. I could see its breath, steaming in the cold air, but the steam was black instead of white. "Run," it whispered. "Run, and I'll give you a 10-minute head start. After that, I hunt." I ran. I crashed through the woods like a stampeding moose, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly ahead of me. Behind me, I could hear laughter that echoed off the trees like thunder. The Wendigo was enjoying this. I had advantages. I knew these woods had been ranging in them for over 2 decades. I knew where the game trails were, where the streams ran, where a man could find shelter, but the thing hunting me had advantages too. It could see in the dark. It could move faster than any living creature I'd ever seen, and it never seemed to get tired. For 3 days, we played our deadly game of hide and seek. I'd find a hiding spot, a fallen log, a cave, a thick stand of trees, and rest for a few hours. But it always found me. Sometimes I'd wake up to find fresh tracks circling wherever I'd slept, like it had watched me dream. Other times I'd hear it calling to me in the voices of my dead friends from Korea, trying to lure me out into the open. On the 3rd night, exhausted and half frozen, I made it back to the research station. I had a plan. It was desperate and probably stupid, but it was all I had left. The station's generator was still running, keeping the place barely warm. I cranked it up to full power and blocked the ventilation. Within an hour, the inside of the cabin was hot as a summer day. I stripped down to my undershirt and waited. The Wendigo came just after midnight. "Harold," it called from outside. "I'm tired of this game. Come out and die with dignity. Come in and get me." I called back. I heard it testing the door, the windows. Finally, it tore the front door off its hinges and stepped inside. The heat hit it like a physical blow. The Wendigo was a creature of ice and winter, and the superheated air made its gray skin start to steam. It let out a shriek that shattered every window in the cabin. "Clever," It hissed, but I could hear the pain in its voice. But not clever enough, it lunged for me, moving fast even as steam rose from its body. I rolled aside, and it crashed into the back wall hard enough to shake the whole building. We fought in that overheated cabin for what felt like hours. The Wendigo was strong enough to crush a man's skull with one hand, but the heat was weakening it. Its movements got slower. Its skin started to crack and peel like old paint. Finally, I got behind it and wrapped my arms around its throat in a sleeper hold I'd learned in the army. It thrashed and bucked like a wild horse, but I held on. Its skin was burning hot now, actually cooking in the superheated air. "You can't kill me," it gasped. "I'm hunger itself. I'm the cold and the dark and the fear of winter." "Maybe," I said. "But you're also Tommy Clearwater, and Tommy Clearwater is going to burn." The Wendigo let out one final scream and went limp in my arms. When I let go, it collapsed to the floor and started to dissolve, melting like ice in the sun. Within minutes, there was nothing left but a stain on the wooden floor and the worst smell I'd ever encountered. I stumbled outside into the cold night air and threw up until my stomach was empty. I spent the rest of that night sitting on the cabin steps, watching the building burn. I'd set it on fire to make sure nothing of the Wendigo survived, and to give the dead some kind of proper cremation. The flames lit up the clearing like a second sunrise. When the morning came, the fire had burned down to smoking ashes. I hiked 12 miles to the nearest road and flagged down a supply truck heading back to town. The official report said the research team had been killed in an avalanche. Equipment malfunction caused a fire that destroyed the evidence. Lewis Ashcroft died heroically trying to save the others. They gave me a medal for my rescue attempt under extreme conditions. I let them believe their comfortable lies. But the truth was harder to bury than paperwork could manage. Over the next few months, I started hearing things. Rangers in remote stations would report strange sounds in the night. Hunting guides would find campsites torn apart in ways that didn't match any known animal. And sometimes, in the deepest winter, when the cold bit hardest, people would disappear. I realized Tommy Clearwater hadn't been the first Wendigo in Alaska, and he wouldn't be the last. The hunger was always there, waiting for the right combination of desperation and despair to take hold of another human soul. I started keeping track, building a network of rangers and guides who'd seen things they couldn't explain but couldn't report either. We learned the signs. Animals fleeing an area, temperatures dropping without reason, the smell of decay in places where nothing had died. And we learned how to fight back. Fire worked, but only if you could trap them somewhere hot enough. Iron hurt them, but you had to get close enough to use it. Running water could slow them down, but not stop them. The most important thing was to never let them get into your head. Never listen to the voices of the dead they used to lure their prey. Over the years, I hunted 7 more Wendigos across Alaska. Each one had once been human. Each one had made the choice to survive by eating human flesh, and each one had paid the price by becoming something that could never be human again. I retired from the Ranger Service in 1978. But I never really stopped working. I trained my replacement, a young man named Bobby Chen, who'd seen something in the Brooks Range that he couldn't explain. I made sure he knew what to look for, what questions to ask, and who to call when the official reports wouldn't cover the truth. I'm 78 years old now, and I live in a small cabin outside Anchorage. My walls are covered with maps of Alaska, marked with red pins where Wendigo activity has been reported. There are more pins now than when I started. People think Alaska is empty wilderness, but they're wrong. It's full of things that used to be human, things that remember being human just enough to hate what they've become. And every winter, when the snow gets deep and the nights get long and people get desperate enough to do things they never thought they'd do, more pins go up on my map. I still get calls sometimes. Park rangers who've found campsites with too many bite marks. Bush pilots who've seen things moving through the forests that walk on 2 legs but aren't quite the right shape. Search and rescue teams who've heard voices calling for help from people they know are already dead. Most of the time, I can talk them through it. Tell them where to set the fires, how to build the traps, what prayers the old Athabascan shamans used to keep the Wendigos at bay. Sometimes I still go out myself, when the situation is bad enough and there's no one else who can handle it. But I'm getting old, and the cold bothers me more each year. Soon, I'll have to pass this responsibility to someone younger, someone strong enough to face the hunger in the dark. The thing about Wendigos is that they're patient. They can wait decades between feedings if they have to. They remember every person who's ever wronged them, every slight, every insult, and they never, ever forget. I killed Tommy Clearwater's body, but I didn't kill his hunger. That's still out there somewhere, waiting for the right host. Waiting for someone desperate enough and hungry enough to invite it in. Every winter, when the news reports start talking about missing hunters and abandoned campsites, I check my maps and make my phone calls. Because as long as there are people in Alaska, there will be Wendigos. As long as humans are willing to do terrible things to survive, the hunger will find new ways to feed. My name is Harold Grimwood, and I'm the man who keeps track of the monsters. It's not a job I wanted, but it's the job I've got. And somewhere out in the darkness, they're watching me too. Waiting, always waiting. My name is Patricia Bloodworth, and I'm recording this on June 15th, 1967. I'm a child psychologist, and I work for the National Park Service now. These are my daily logs from our mission to Glacier Bay, Alaska. I don't know if anyone will ever hear these recordings, but I need to document what happened here. I should explain why I'm in Alaska. 2 years ago, I lost my daughter Sarah in a drowning accident back in Oregon. She was 8 years old, with bright red hair and freckles across her nose. After that, I couldn't stay in our old house. I couldn't keep working with children in therapy sessions. Everything reminded me of her laugh, her voice calling Mommy from the next room. So when the Park Service offered me this assignment, I took it. They needed someone with my background to investigate what they called unusual reports from tourist boats near Glacier Bay. Families were complaining about strange sounds, children laughing and playing where no children should be. Some tourists even claimed to see small handprints on their boat windows during foggy weather. At first, I thought it was just people's imaginations. Glacier Bay is a spooky place. The ice makes strange noises when it shifts and cracks. Sound carries in weird ways across the water, but the reports kept coming in, and they were always about children. My team arrived yesterday. Jake Morrison is our Coast Guard pilot, a good man with 20 years of flying experience. Dr. Elena Rodriguez is a marine biologist who knows these waters better than anyone. And Joseph Strongwind is our cultural advisor. He's Tlingit, and his people have lived in this area for thousands of years. Joseph told us something interesting last night around the campfire. He said his grandmother used to warn children about spirits called kushtaka. They look like children, but they're really otters that can change their shape. According to the old stories, they appear to people who have lost children, trying to trick them into drowning. I laughed when he first told us, not because I was being mean, but because it sounded like the kind of story adults tell to keep kids away from dangerous water. Joseph didn't laugh, though. He just looked at me with those dark eyes and said, "Some stories exist because they're true, Miss Bloodworth." This morning, we took our boat out to the area where most of the sightings happened. The water was calm and gray, like a mirror reflecting the cloudy sky. Massive glaciers rose up around us, their blue-white ice looking ancient and untouchable. Everything was quiet except for the boat engine and the occasional crack of ice in the distance. That's when we heard it for the first time. Laughter. Children's laughter, high and sweet, coming from somewhere across the water. Jake cut the engine, and we all listened. The sound echoed off the glaciers, making it impossible to tell exactly where it was coming from. But it was definitely children, at least 3 or 4 of them, maybe more. There, Elena pointed toward a small ice floe about 100 yards away. "Do you see them?" I squinted through the morning mist. For just a moment, I thought I saw small figures on the ice, children in old-fashioned clothes, playing some kind of game. But when I blinked and looked again, there was nothing there. Jake started the engine again. "Let's get closer," he said. But as we moved toward the ice floe, the laughter stopped. The mist grew thicker, and the temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath. Our compass started spinning wildly, and Jake had to navigate by sight alone. When we finally reached the spot where we'd seen the children, there was nothing. Just empty ice and water. But Elena found something strange. Small wet footprints on the ice, child-sized, leading to the edge, and then disappearing into the water. "The ice is too thin here. she said, kneeling down to examine the prints. No real child could stand on this without falling through. That's when I heard it, a voice, clear as day, calling from the fog. Mommy? My heart stopped. It was Sarah's voice. I was sure of it. I'm recording this on the morning of June 16th. Last night was difficult. After we heard Sarah's voice calling from the fog, I couldn't sleep. I kept playing it over in my mind, wondering if I was losing my sanity. Grief does strange things to people. I know that better than most. But this morning proved I wasn't imagining things. We went out early, before the tourist boats arrived. The water was smooth as glass, and the air was so still it felt like we were floating through a photograph. Elena was taking water samples when we heard the children again. This time, they weren't just laughing, they were singing. Ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies. The voices came from every direction at once, young and innocent, echoing off the ice walls. Ashes, ashes, we all fall down. And they did. Fall down. We saw them clearly this time, 5 or 6 children playing on different ice floes around us. They looked solid, real, wearing clothes from maybe 50 years ago. When they finished their game, they all collapsed with giggles, just like children do. Jake was reaching for the radio to report our location when one of the children stood up and waved at us. A little girl with dark pigtails and a blue dress. Come play with us, she called. Her voice carried perfectly across the water, even though she was at least 200 yards away. We're so lonely. I found myself standing up in the boat. Something deep in my chest was pulling me toward those children. They needed help. They were too far from shore, and the ice looked dangerous. Patricia, sit down. Elena grabbed my arm. Something's not right here. She was right. As I watched, one of the children, a boy in suspenders and a cap, stepped off the ice, flow into the water. But instead of sinking, he began to change. His arms grew longer, his face stretched into a snout, and his body became sleek and dark. He was an otter now, floating on his back and chattering at us. Then he changed back into a boy. Jesus Christ, Jake whispered. Joseph had been quiet all morning, but now he spoke up. We need to leave. Now. But they're just children, I said. Even as the words left my mouth, I knew they weren't true. No, Joseph said firmly. They're Kushtaka. They've been waiting for someone like you, Miss Bloodworth. Someone who lost a child. The children on the ice floes began moving toward us, hopping from one piece of ice to another with impossible grace. As they got closer, I could see their faces more clearly. They looked normal, but their eyes were too dark, like deep water, and when they smiled, their teeth seemed too sharp. Patricia, one of them called. It was Sarah's voice again. Mommy, I've been waiting for you. I couldn't help it. Tears started streaming down my face. Every logical part of my brain knew this wasn't my daughter, but my heart didn't care. I leaned toward the edge of the boat. Jake grabbed me and pulled me back. Start the engine, he shouted to Elena. But when Elena tried to start the motor, nothing happened. The engine was completely dead. Our radio wasn't working either. Just static and strange whispers that might have been words. The children were getting closer. Some of them were still on the ice, but others had slipped into the water. I could see dark shapes moving under the surface, too big to be human children, but too organized to be ordinary animals. There's an emergency kit in the bow, Jake said quietly. Flares and backup radio. Elena, can you? He never finished the sentence. Something grabbed Elena from behind and pulled her into the water. One moment she was reaching for the emergency kit. The next she was gone with barely a splash. The boat rocked violently, and I nearly fell. Overboard myself. Elena, Jake lunged toward the side where she disappeared. The water was black and still. No bubbles, no ripples, nothing. Then we heard her voice from somewhere under the boat. Come play with us, Jake. The water's not cold at all. But it was Elena's voice with a child's words, and there was something wrong with the way she spoke, like she had water in her mouth. Jake was about to jump in after her when Joseph grabbed his arm. That's not her anymore, he said. The Kushtaka have her now. As if to prove his point, something that looked like Elena's face appeared in the water near the boat. But the face was pale and bloated, and when it opened its mouth to speak, water poured out. Play with us, it said in Elena's voice. It's so much fun down here. Then it sank back into the darkness. The children on the ice were clapping and laughing. "Come on, Patricia," Sarah's voice called again. "Don't you want to see me? Don't you miss me?" I did miss her. More than anything in the world. But I was starting to understand that these things, whatever they were, weren't here to help me reunite with my daughter. They were here to make me join her. This is my recording from June 17th. I don't know how much longer we have. After Elena disappeared yesterday, Jake managed to get the engine working again. We made it back to shore, but barely. The whole way, we could hear children singing behind us, getting closer and farther away, like they were playing hide-and-seek with our boat. That night, Joseph told us more about the Kushtaka. According to his people's stories, they're the spirits of children who drowned long ago. They're trapped between the world of the living and the dead, and they're lonely. So they try to convince adults to join them, especially adults who are grieving for lost children. They feed on sorrow, Joseph explained. Your pain makes them stronger, and it makes you weaker. The more you listen to them, the harder it becomes to tell what's real. I wanted to leave right then, pack up our equipment and radio for an emergency pickup. But Jake said we couldn't abandon our mission, and honestly, I wasn't sure I could leave. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Sarah calling for me. This morning, we found Elena. She was sitting on the beach near our camp, still wearing her research clothes from yesterday. Her back was turned to us, and she was humming a children's song. When I called her name, she turned around and smiled. But it wasn't Elena's smile. Her face was too pale, and her eyes were completely black. Water dripped constantly from her hair and clothes, pooling on the sand around her feet. I had so much fun playing yesterday, she said in a voice that sounded like Elena but with a child's way of speaking. Do you want to play too? Jake pulled out his pistol. Stay back. Elena laughed, and it was a child's giggle coming from an adult's throat. Silly Jake, you can't hurt us with that. We're already dead. Then she dove into the shallow water and disappeared. When Jake ran to the spot where she'd gone under, there was nothing there except a few otters floating just offshore, watching us with intelligent eyes. We spent the day trying to radio for help, but something was interfering with our communications. Every time Jake got through to the Coast Guard base, children's voices would start singing on the frequency, drowning out everything else. By evening, the children had grown bolder. They appeared on our beach in groups, playing games just out of reach. Tag, hide and seek, duck, duck, goose. Normal children's games, except they were playing them in the shallow water, and sometimes they would change into otters mid-game and then change back. The worst part was that I recognized some of them now. Not just Sarah, but other children I'd worked with over the years. Children who had died in accidents or from illness. They all looked exactly as they had in life, except for those black, endless eyes. We've been waiting so long for you, Patricia, Sarah said. She was sitting on a piece of driftwood about 10 feet away, swinging her legs like she used to do on our porch swing. I missed you so much. Don't you want to be with me again? You're not, Sarah, I said, but my voice was shaking. I am, she insisted. Remember how you used to braid my hair? Remember the song you sang when I had nightmares? Then she started singing, You Are My Sunshine, My Only Sunshine. It was Sarah's voice, perfect and sweet and exactly the way I remembered it. I started walking toward her before I realized what I was doing. Jake grabbed my arm. Patricia, don't. But I pulled away from him. I needed to get closer. I needed to see if it was really her. You make me happy when skies are gray, Sarah continued. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. I was almost close enough to touch her when Joseph stepped between us. Look at her eyes, he said quietly. Really look. I forced myself to focus on Sarah's face. The features were right, the voice was right, but her eyes, they were like looking into deep water, dark and cold and empty. Please don't take my sunshine away, Sarah finished the song. Then she smiled, and I saw that her teeth were pointed like an otter's. You're not my daughter, I whispered. The thing that looked like Sarah stopped smiling. But I could be, it said in a voice that was no longer childlike. Forever and ever, just come into the water with me. Around us, the other children had stopped playing. They were all staring at me with those black, hungry eyes. Come play with us, Patricia, they chanted. Come play with us forever. That's when Jake started shooting. The bullets passed right through the children like they were made of mist. They laughed and clapped as if it was part of the game. Then one of them, a boy who looked about 10, walked up to Jake and touched his hand. Jake screamed, his gun fell to the sand, and ice crystals began spreading up his arm. Within seconds, his whole body was covered in frost. So cold, he gasped. Can't feel. The children gathered around him, chattering excitedly. Come play in the water, Jake. It's not cold there. It's warm and safe. Jake took a step toward the ocean. Then another. Joseph began chanting in Tlingit, words I didn't understand, but that seemed to make the children hesitate. Some of them flickered like candle flames in the wind. The old protections still work, Joseph told me. But not for long. They're getting stronger. Jake was knee-deep in the water now, moving like he was sleepwalking. The children swam around him in circles, sometimes as children, sometimes as otters. Jake, I ran after him, but the water felt like ice, even though it was June. The cold hit my legs and immediately began numbing them. That's when I realized this wasn't just about temperature. The water itself was wrong, full of some presence that wanted to pull me down. I could feel hands grabbing at my ankles, small hands, child-sized, but impossibly strong. I managed to grab Jake's arm and pull him back toward shore. He was conscious, but confused, talking to people who weren't there. Elena says the water's nice, he mumbled. She wants us to come swimming. Behind us, the children were singing again, Ring Around the Rosy. But they'd changed the words. Ring around Patricia, pocket full of sorrow. Ashes, ashes, we all fall down. And as they sang, I felt something inside me breaking. The part of me that wanted to resist, the part that knew this was wrong. It was getting harder to remember why I shouldn't just walk into that dark water and be with my daughter forever. Joseph's chanting was getting weaker. When I looked at him, I saw that his face was pale and strained, there, obliquely. Using my own children against me now, he said. I can see them in the water. My son, who died last winter, my daughter, who was born too early. His voice cracked. I don't know how much longer I can hold them back. The children in the water were changing, becoming more and more like the people we'd lost. Perfect copies, except for those terrible eyes. And Sarah was walking toward me again, arms outstretched. Mommy, she said, I'm so cold and lonely, please hold me. This time, I couldn't make myself back away. I'm recording this on what I think is June 18th. Time has gotten strange here. Sometimes it feels like minutes have passed, sometimes like years. Last night, Joseph told me the truth about the Kushtaka, the whole truth, not just the stories they tell children. They aren't just spirits of drowned children. They're something older, something that feeds on the connection between parents and their lost children. Every time someone like me comes to these waters, carrying grief and love and desperate hope, they grow stronger. My people have been fighting them for generations, Joseph explained. There are rituals, protections, ways to trap them, but it requires sacrifice. Jake was getting worse. He spent most of the night standing in the shallow water, talking to Elena and laughing at jokes only he could hear. When we tried to pull him back to shore, he fought us with surprising strength. She's teaching me how to breathe underwater, he said. It's not scary at all, you just have to let go. This morning, the children tried a new approach. Instead of appearing as the dead, they showed me what could be. I woke up to find Sarah sitting by my sleeping bag, looking exactly as she should have if she'd lived to be 10. Taller, with longer hair, missing a front tooth. Look how much I've grown, Mommy, she said. I learned to read chapter books, and I can swim all the way to the bottom of the lake now. Do you want to? See? It was so perfectly what I dreamed of, watching my daughter grow up, that I almost fell for it completely. But then I noticed she wasn't breathing. Her chest never rose and fell. You're not real, I said. I'm as real as you want me to be, she replied. As real as you believe. Just come into the water with me, and we can be together forever. Really together. Around us, more children appeared. All the clients I'd lost over the years, all the kids who'd died despite my best efforts to help them. They looked healthy and happy, playing in the morning sunlight. You couldn't save us then, one of them said. But you can join us now. We're not sad anymore, Patricia. We're never sad here. For a moment, I wanted it so badly I could taste it. No more grief, no more guilt, no more waking up every morning remembering that Sarah was gone. Just eternal childhood, eternal play, eternal innocence. I was walking toward the water when Joseph grabbed my arm. They're lying, he said. Look closer. I forced myself to really look at the children, past the perfect faces and innocent smiles. What I saw made my stomach turn. They were hungry, desperately, eternally hungry. And they weren't playing, they were performing, like actors in a play, hoping to convince me to join their eternal performance. The water doesn't take away the pain, Joseph continued. It preserves it forever. They're still drowning, still dying, over and over again. That's why they need new victims. To share the suffering. The children's faces began to change, showing their true nature. Sarah's skin turned blue-white, and water poured from her mouth when she tried to speak. The others showed the wounds that had killed them, broken necks, crushed skulls, bodies torn by animals. "Don't look at us like that," Sarah screamed, but her voice was full of water. "We're beautiful, we're perfect, we never have to grow up." That's when I understood. They were trapped in the moment of their deaths, unable to move on, unable to find peace, and they wanted to trap others with them. Jake was already knee-deep in the water again, and this time he wouldn't let us pull him back. "I have to help Elena," he said. "She's in trouble down there." He dove under and didn't come back up. Joseph and I waited on the shore, watching the water. After a few minutes, we saw Jake's face appear near the surface. He was smiling, but his lips were blue, and his eyes were black like the others. "The water's nice," he said in Jake's voice with a child's words. "Come play with us, Patricia." Then he sank back down. "It's just us now," Joseph said, "and they're getting stronger with each person they take." He pulled out a leather pouch filled with objects I didn't recognize: carved bone, unusual stones, dried plants. "My grandmother taught me the binding ritual," he said. "It can trap them, but only if someone stays behind to hold the binding in place." "What do you mean, stays behind?" Joseph was already drawing symbols in the sand with a piece of driftwood. "The binding requires a life freely given. Someone has to go into the water willingly, not as a victim, but as a guardian. Someone has to stay with them and keep them contained." "No," I said immediately. "There has to be another way." "There is," he said quietly. "You could leave, get in that emergency raft and paddle away. They might not follow you off their hunting grounds." "Might not?" "They're stronger now. With Jake and Elena feeding them, they might be able to travel farther than before." I looked out at the water, where dozens of children were now visible, playing their eternal games. More kept appearing as the day wore on. Children from all different time periods, wearing clothes from different decades. How many people had they taken over the years? How many grieving parents had come to these waters, looking for closure, and found only death? "If I do the ritual," I asked, "what happens to them?" "They stay trapped here, in these waters. They can't take anyone else, but they also can't move on to whatever comes after death. And the guardian stays with them forever, keeping the binding strong." I was quiet for a long time. The children had noticed our conversation and were gathering closer to shore. "Patricia," Sarah called. "What are you talking about? Come play." But now I could see the desperation in her black eyes, the endless, aching loneliness. She wasn't evil, she was just lost and scared, and had been for so long that she'd forgotten any other way to be. "If I do this," I said to Joseph, "will they be at peace?" "No," he said honestly. "But they'll stop hurting others. And maybe that's enough." I thought about all the families who would come to Glacier Bay in the future. Parents bringing their children on vacation, never knowing that hungry spirits waited in the water. How many more would die if these creatures were allowed to spread? "Teach me the ritual," I said. "This is my final recording. It's June 19th, 1967, and I'm about to do something that terrifies me more than anything I've ever faced." Joseph taught me the binding words last night. They're in Tlingit, a language I don't speak, but he made me practice until I could say them perfectly. The ritual requires me to speak them while standing in the water with the Kushtaka, holding a piece of carved bone that's been in his family for generations. "The binding will trap them here," he explained. "But it needs a willing guardian to maintain it. Someone who chooses to stay, not someone who's been tricked or forced." "And what happens to me?" Joseph looked away. "You'll become part of the binding, conscious, aware, but unable to leave. You'll have to watch over them forever." This morning, I wrote a letter explaining everything and sealed it with our official documents. Maybe someday someone will find it and understand what happened here. Maybe it will help them if the Kushtaka ever break free. The children have been watching us all day. They know something is different. Sarah keeps trying to talk to me, but I won't listen anymore. Every word she speaks makes the ritual harder. Joseph offered to do it himself, but the binding doesn't work that way. It has to be someone the spirits want, someone they've been trying to claim. That's me. I'm scared. I'm more scared than I've ever been in my life. But I keep thinking about other mothers, other fathers who might come here looking for peace and find only death. I can't let that happen. The sun is setting now. Joseph says twilight is the best time for the ritual, when the barrier between worlds is thinnest. I'm walking into the water now. It's cold, so cold it burns, but I can feel the Kushtaka gathering around me. They think they've won. Sarah appears first, smiling her terrible smile. I knew you'd come to me eventually, Mommy. But when I speak the binding words, her expression changes to confusion, then fear. What are you doing? She demands, but her voice is no longer Sarah's. It's something old and hungry and desperate. The water around us begins to glow with a strange blue light. Other children appear, dozens of them, all the spirits that have been trapped here. They're trying to flee, but the binding is already forming, invisible chains holding them to this place. You can't do this, the thing wearing Sarah's face screams. We'll be trapped forever. Yes, I say, holding Joseph's carved bone tight in my hand. But you won't hurt anyone else. The final binding words leave my mouth, and I feel something snap into place. The children stop trying to escape and turn to stare at me with their black eyes. You're one of us now, Sarah says. But she doesn't sound happy about it. I can feel the change beginning. My body is becoming lighter, less solid. But my mind remains clear. I understand now what Joseph meant about being a guardian. I'll be here forever, watching, making sure the binding holds. The water doesn't feel cold anymore. Nothing feels much of anything. But I'm aware, and I'm in control. When the children try to reach beyond their prison, I can stop them. When new spirits try to join them, I can turn them away. It's not the kind of peace I thought I wanted, but it's the kind of peace the world needs. I can see Joseph on the shore, performing the final part of the ritual. He's drawing symbols in the sand that will hide this place from casual visitors, making it feel unwelcoming to tourists and boats. Sarah is looking at me with something that might be curiosity instead of hunger. Are you really going to stay here forever? She asks. Yes, I tell her. Won't you get lonely? I look around at all the lost children, trapped between life and death, and I realize something. They're not evil. They're just scared and lost and have been alone for so long that they forgot how to be anything else. Maybe, I say, but you won't have to be lonely anymore. For the first time since I've seen her, Sarah, or the thing wearing her face, almost smiles. Not with hunger or trickery, but with something that might be relief. The recording is getting faint now. I can feel my connection to the living world fading. But I'm not afraid anymore. I'm Patricia Bloodworth, and I choose to stay. The binding holds, the children are safe, and maybe, in time, we'll all find a different kind of peace. My name is Marcus Wolfbane, and I'm going to tell you about the worst 3 days of my life. Days that changed everything I thought I knew about what's really out there in the wilderness. I've been a park ranger at Denali for 6 years now. Before that, I spent 4 years in Vietnam with the Green Berets, learning how to blow things up and how to stay alive when everything wants to kill you. Thought I'd seen the worst things people could do to each other. Turns out, I hadn't seen anything yet. September in Alaska gets cold fast. The morning I'm telling you about started like any other. Coffee that could strip paint, radio, check with headquarters, and another patrol into the backcountry looking for illegal hunters. These rich guys come up from the lower 48 thinking they can shoot whatever they want if they throw enough money around. My job is to prove them wrong. I live alone in a cabin about 20 miles from the main ranger station. Some people think that's weird. But after what I saw in the war, I need the quiet. The forest doesn't lie to you. It doesn't pretend to be something it's not. A wolf is a wolf, a bear is a bear. Simple. That morning, something felt off right from the start. I've been in these woods long enough to know when things aren't right. The birds weren't singing, no squirrels chattering in the trees. Even the insects seemed quieter than usual. When you've been trained to notice things that might kill you, you pay attention to details like that. I was checking an area about 15 miles north of my cabin where we'd been getting reports of gunshots after hunting season ended. Takes about 3 hours to hike there, through some of the thickest forest in the park. I know every trail, every stream, every place someone might try to hide a camp. What I found was worse than any illegal hunting camp I'd ever seen. 5 men, all dead. But not just dead, arranged. Someone had dragged them into a circle around their campfire. The biggest guy, probably the leader, was propped up in a camp chair like he was still running the show. His dead eyes stared at nothing, while dried blood covered his throat. I'd seen death before, lots of it, but this was different. This was someone making a point. The bite marks were what really got my attention. Deep puncture wounds in their necks and arms. Too big for any wolf I'd ever tracked. Too deep for any bear I knew about. These looked like something from a nature documentary about prehistoric predators. I called it in on my radio. "Base, this is Ranger Wolfbane. I've got 5 dead hunters at coordinates." I rattled off the numbers while I walked around the scene, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. "Copy that, Marcus. Probably a bear attack. Secure the scene and wait for the investigation team. When will they get here? Probably tomorrow. Budget cuts, you know how it is. Tomorrow." Great. That meant spending the night in the woods with whatever had done this still running around. But I'd been alone in worse places with worse things hunting me. I started taking pictures, making notes, doing everything by the book. That's when I noticed the tracks. Now, I've been tracking animals since I was old enough to walk. My dad taught me, and Vietnam made me better at it. These tracks, they started out looking like wolf prints. Big ones, but normal wolf prints around the outside of the camp. But closer to the bodies, they changed. The back paws started looking longer, more like feet, and the spacing between the prints got wider, like whatever made them was walking upright. I followed the trail for about 50 yards before it disappeared into the rocky ground near a stream. But what I found at the end made my blood run cold. A pile of the hunter's gear, rifles, scopes, knives, all arranged in a neat stack like someone was collecting trophies. But arranged by someone who understood what each piece was for. The scopes were separated from the rifles. The ammunition was sorted by caliber. Animals don't do that. Animals don't understand human tools. That's when I heard it, a howl from somewhere up in the hills. Long, loud, and definitely a wolf. But there was something else in it, something that sounded almost like laughter. The howl was answered by another one, then another, then 3 more, all from different directions. I wasn't dealing with one animal, I was dealing with a pack, and they knew I was there. The smart thing would have been to hike back to my truck and wait for backup. But I'd recognized one of the dead hunters, Frank Delacroix, a guide who'd been poaching in my territory for years. Local law enforcement knew about him, but could never catch him with enough evidence to make anything stick. Seeing him dead should have bothered me more than it did. I decided to follow the trail a little further, just to get a better idea of what we were dealing with. I had my rifle, my radio, and enough experience in hostile territory to keep myself alive for a few hours. The tracks led uphill, through dense pine forest where the canopy blocked out most of the afternoon sun. Every few hundred yards, I'd find another sign, a tree with claw marks 8 feet off the ground, a boulder with deep scratches that looked almost like someone had been sharpening knives on it, and then I found the camera. One of the hunters had set up a trail camera about a quarter mile from their camp, the kind that takes pictures when something moves in front of it. The camera was still there, still working, but it had been moved. Instead of pointing at a game trail, it was aimed back toward the camp, like whatever moved it wanted to record what happened. My hands shook a little as I pulled out the memory card and put it in my camera to look at the pictures. The first dozen were normal. Deer, a few ravens. Nothing interesting. Then the timestamps jumped to yesterday, evening, right around sunset. The first strange picture showed the hunters sitting around their fire, eating dinner, talking and laughing. Nothing unusual. But in the background, just at the edge of the camera's range, you could see eyes reflecting the flash. Too high off the ground to be a normal wolf. Too bright to be anything I'd ever seen before. The next picture was taken 20 minutes later. The hunters were getting ready for bed, banking their fire, hanging their food. But now there were more eyes in the darkness. A lot more. Arranged in a rough circle around the entire camp, the third picture made me sit down hard on a fallen log. It showed something standing at the edge of the firelight. Something that looked like a wolf that had learned to walk like a man. 7 feet tall, easy, covered in dark fur, but standing upright on its hind legs. Its front paws looked almost like hands with claws. And its eyes looked smart. Not animal smart, human smart. The final pictures showed the attack. I forced myself to look through all of them, even though my stomach wanted to empty itself all over the forest floor. The creatures moved like soldiers. Coordinated, planned. While some attacked from the front, others flanked around the sides. When the hunters grabbed for their rifles, the things anticipated where they'd go and cut them off. It was over in less than 10 minutes. Professional, military. And when it was done, the biggest creature, the one that had been standing in the firelight, looked directly at the camera, like it knew it was being recorded, like it wanted to be recorded. Then it did something that made my blood freeze in my veins. It smiled. I was still staring at that picture when I heard a stick break behind me. Close, maybe 20 feet. I spun around, rifle ready, and saw it. The same creature from the photograph, standing between 2 pine trees like it had been watching me the whole time. 7 feet of nightmare that shouldn't exist, but was definitely real. We stared at each other for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few seconds. It tilted its head like a dog, trying to understand something. Then it opened its mouth and spoke. Not words exactly, but sounds that had meaning. Low growls and whines that somehow made sense in my head, like tuning into a radio station. Asterisk, you are not prey. Asterisk, that's what it was saying. Somehow, I understood that. Asterisk, you are something else. Asterisk, the creature took one step closer. Not threatening, exactly. More like curious. I kept my rifle pointed at its chest, but I didn't shoot. Something told me that would be a very bad idea. This thing had taken down 5 armed men without breaking a sweat. What could one more rifle do? Asterisk, you smell like war. Like the pack that fights together. Asterisk. The creature's voice in my head was getting clearer. Like tuning that radio station in better. Asterisk. Why do you hunt alone? Asterisk. Before I could even think of how to answer that, it was gone. Not running away, just gone, like it had never been there at all. The only proof it had been real was the indentations its feet had left in the soft ground. Deep prints. Definitely not human. Definitely not any kind of wolf I'd ever heard of. I looked around the forest, knowing I was being watched but not seeing anything. The smart part of my brain was screaming at me to get out of there, to run back to my truck and drive until I hit civilization. But the soldier part of my brain was thinking something else entirely. I was being hunted by something that thought like a soldier, something that used tactics and strategy. In Vietnam, when you ran into an enemy that could outfight you, there was only one thing to do. You had to outthink them. The howling started again as the sun began to set, closer this time. All around me, I counted at least 5 different voices, maybe more. They were coordinating, talking to each other in their own language. And they were moving closer. I had maybe an hour of daylight left, and I was still 3 miles from my truck. The smart move would have been to find a defensible position and wait for dawn. But these things had taken out 5 men who thought they were safe in their camp. I needed to think like I was back in enemy territory, because that's exactly where I was. The old training kicked in as I moved through the forest. Watch for ambush points. Listen for sounds that don't belong. Use the terrain to your advantage. Never move in a straight line. But the things hunting me had advantages I'd never faced in Vietnam. They could see in the dark, they could smell me from miles away, and they knew this forest better than I did. I was halfway back to the trail when they made their first real move. Something big crashed through the undergrowth to my left, not trying to be quiet, trying to drive me somewhere. Basic wolf pack tactics, but these weren't basic. Wolves. When I turned toward the sound, ready to shoot, another crash came from my right. They were hurting me, pushing me exactly where they wanted me to go. I broke into a run, crashing through the forest as quietly as I could manage. Behind me, I could hear them keeping pace, not trying to catch me yet, just keeping me moving in the right direction. That's when I realized they weren't just hunting me, they were testing me. A fallen tree blocked the trail ahead. Perfect place for an ambush. I slowed down, looking for another way around, when something dropped out of the trees above. Not onto me, just close enough to show me it could have landed on me if it wanted to. The creature that hit the ground looked younger than the one I'd seen before. Smaller but still bigger than any wolf had a right to be. It crouched there for a second, watching me, then melted back into the shadows. Asterisk. Fast enough. Asterisk. That voice said in my head. Not the same voice as before. This one was lighter, more playful. Asterisk. But not fast enough to run. Asterisk. More crashes in the brush around me. I spun in a circle, rifle pointed at nothing, trying to track movement I could hear but not see. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure they could hear it. Then I made a mistake that almost got me killed. I stepped backward, and my foot hit something soft. Something that groaned. I looked down and saw another hunter, not one of the 5 from the camp, someone else entirely. He was alive, barely, with bite marks all over his arms and legs. He'd been bleeding for a while. "Help," he whispered. "Please." Every instinct I had told me it was a trap. But I couldn't just leave a man to die. I knelt down beside him, keeping my rifle ready, and tried to see how bad he was hurt. That's when they attacked. 3 of them came out of the trees at once, moving faster than anything that size had a right to move. I got one shot off, caught the closest one in the shoulder, spun it around but didn't drop it. Then they were on me, claws raked across my backpack, shredding it open. Teeth snapped at my throat, missing by inches when I threw myself sideways. Something hit me in the ribs, hard enough to knock the wind out of me. But here's the thing about fighting for your life. Your body remembers how to do it, even when your brain is too scared to think. I rolled away from the claws, came up swinging my rifle like a club, and connected with something's head hard enough to hear bone crack. One of them yelped and backed off. The others circled me, growling, but didn't press the attack. Asterisk. "Good," asterisk said the first voice, the older one. The leader. Asterisk, "You fight like pack. Like wolf." Asterisk, asterisk, "But can you think like pack?" Asterisk. That's when I understood. This wasn't about killing me, this was some kind of test. They wanted to see what I was made of. The wounded hunter at my feet wasn't bait in a trap, he was the test. I looked down at him again, still alive, but not for much longer. I could try to carry him out, but that would slow me down enough that these things could pick us off whenever they wanted. Or I could leave him and save myself. "What do you want?" I said out loud, talking to the darkness around me. Asterisk. "We want to know if you are worthy to hunt in our territory." Asterisk. Asterisk. "Or if you are just another soft human who thinks he owns the wild places." Asterisk. I thought about Frank Delacroix and his illegal hunting. About rich men coming up here, thinking they could take whatever they wanted. About all the animals that had died just so someone could hang a head on their wall. Then I looked at the dying man at my feet. Some guide, probably. Someone making money off the same kind of destruction. I made my choice. I picked up the wounded man and slung him over my shoulders. He was heavier than I expected, and the blood loss was making him weak, but he was still breathing. "If you want to test me," I said to the forest, "then let's see if I can get him out of here alive." The creatures around me went completely silent. For a long moment, the only sound was my own breathing and the wounded man's weak whimpering. Then, from somewhere ahead of me on the trail, I heard something that made my skin crawl. Slow clapping, like someone appreciating a good performance. But there was nothing human about the sound of those claws hitting together. Carrying a dying man through hostile territory in the dark was not how I'd planned to spend my evening. But life rarely goes according to plan, especially when you're being stalked by things that shouldn't exist. The creatures stayed just outside my vision as I struggled down the trail. I could hear them moving parallel to the path, keeping pace, sometimes getting close enough that I caught glimpses of fur and eyes in the darkness. But they didn't attack. Whatever test this was, I was apparently passing it so far. The wounded man, his name was Carl, according to the hunting license in his jacket, drifted in and out of consciousness. When he was awake, he whispered fragments of what had happened to him. Been hunting us for days. Not normal wolves. They talked to each other. Set traps like people. The more he talked, the more my blood ran cold. These things weren't just smart animals. They were something else entirely. I was maybe a mile from my truck when they finally showed themselves. The Alpha stepped out onto the trail ahead of me. Up close, in the beam of my flashlight, it was even more terrifying than the photographs had shown. 7.5 feet tall, covered in thick black fur, but built like a man who lifted weights for a living. Its face was a nightmare mix of wolf and human features, elongated snout full of teeth, but with eyes that held intelligence and purpose. It was wearing something around its neck, a necklace made of dog tags and ranger badges. My blood went cold when I saw my own name on one of the badges. The one I'd lost 2 years ago during a search and rescue operation. "You know who I am," the voice in my head said. And suddenly, I did. "Daniel Morrison," I whispered. "You disappeared 3 years ago." Ranger Daniel Morrison had been my predecessor. Experienced, tough, someone who knew these woods better than anyone. He'd gone out on a routine patrol and never come back. We'd searched for weeks but never found any trace of him. "I found something in these woods, the creature that had been," Daniel said. Asterisk. Something old, something that had been waiting. It made me an offer. Power, strength, the ability to protect the wilderness from those who would destroy it. All I had to do was become part of the pack. And you said yes? Asterisk. Look around you, Marcus. Look at what humans do to this place. They come here to kill things for sport. They poison the streams, cut down the forests, drive out the animals. Asterisk, asterisk, we stopped them. Asterisk, I thought about the dead, hunters in the camp, about Frank Delacroix and all the animals he'd killed over the years. By murdering people? By protecting what cannot protect itself. The other pack members emerged from the trees around us. 5 of them total, all different sizes, but all with that same terrible mix of human intelligence and animal savagery. I could see enough human features in their faces to realize the truth. They had all been people once. Rangers, hunters, maybe researchers who had come into these woods and accepted the same offer Daniel had taken. "The choice is simple," Daniel continued. "Join us willingly, and keep your mind, your memories, your sense of purpose, or," he gestured toward Carl, who was barely breathing on my shoulders, "become prey." I set Carl down gently beside the trail and straightened up to face the pack. My rifle was still in my hands, but I knew it wouldn't do much good against 6 supernatural predators. "What if I choose option 3? I said. "There is no option 3. "Sure there is." I pulled the pin on the grenade I'd been carrying since Vietnam and never had the nerve to throw away. 4 seconds to detonation. More than enough time. You would kill yourself rather than live with power? "I've seen what power does to people," I said. "Turns them into things like Frank Delacroix. Or things like you. We are nothing like him. You're killers who think you're justified." That's exactly what he was. The pack tensed, ready to spring, but Daniel held them back with a gesture. "You cannot kill us all with one explosion. Maybe not, but I can kill enough of you to matter." I let the grenade roll to a stop right between us, then dove sideways and grabbed Carl, pulling him behind the biggest tree I could find. The explosion lit up the forest like daylight for half a second. When my ears stopped ringing and the smoke cleared, 2 of the pack members were down, not dead, but hurt bad enough that they weren't getting back up anytime soon. Daniel was still standing, but he was bleeding from a dozen shrapnel wounds. The remaining pack members looked stunned. "Impressive, asterisk," Daniel said. Asterisk, but pointless. That's when Carl grabbed my ankle. "Behind you," he whispered. I turned around and saw it, a shadow that didn't match anything around it. Something that had been watching this whole confrontation from the darkness. The real Alpha. The thing that had made Daniel and the others into what they were. It was bigger than any of them. Older. And when it spoke, its voice didn't just echo in my head. It seemed to come from the forest itself. Asterisk. "Enough games." Asterisk. The shadow stepped forward and became solid. If Daniel and his pack were nightmares, this thing was the source of nightmares. Ancient beyond measure, with eyes like burning coals and claws that could have opened car doors. "You have impressed my children, but you have also wounded them. There must be consequences." I raised my rifle, knowing it was useless, but refusing to go down without a fight. "Join us willingly, and we will heal your friend. Refuse, and watch him die slowly while we hunt you through these woods until you are too tired to run anymore." I looked down at Carl. still breathing, but barely. Even if I got him to a hospital in the next hour, he might not make it. Then I looked at Daniel and his pack. Once, they had been good people trying to protect the wilderness they loved. Now they were predators who killed anyone they decided was a threat. "Counteroffer," I said. Both the ancient thing and Daniel tilted their heads, curious. "Single combat, me against him." I pointed at Daniel. "If I win, you let us both go and leave this area. If he wins, you can do whatever you want with us." The ancient thing laughed, a sound like wind through dead leaves. "You would challenge my strongest child to single combat? You, who are only human? I'm a soldier. He's a Pharaoh, killer. Let's see which one is better." Daniel stepped forward, the wounds from my grenade already beginning to heal. "I accept." The fight was everything I expected and nothing like what I'd prepared for. Daniel was faster than any human, stronger than anything his size had a right to be, and he healed from injuries that should have dropped him. But he fought like an animal, all instinct and aggression. I fought like a soldier. When he came at me with claws extended, I used his momentum against him, throwing him over my hip into a tree trunk. When he tried to circle around behind me, I kept moving, never letting him get to my back. When he grabbed for my throat, I drove my knee into his solar plexus and felt something crack. The fight lasted maybe 10 minutes. It felt like hours. In the end, it came down to a choice he had to make. He had me pinned against a fallen log, claws at my throat, victory within his grasp. But to finish me, he would have had to kill me, the way an animal kills, quick and savage. Instead, he hesitated. For just a second, the human part of him remembered what it was like to be something other than a predator. That second was enough. I got my combat knife between his ribs and found his heart. As he died, the wolf features faded from his face. For a moment, he looked like Ranger Daniel Morrison again. Young, dedicated, someone who really cared about protecting the wilderness. "Thank you," he whispered. The ancient thing watched its champion die without any visible emotion. "Unexpected. Asterisk," it said. Asterisk. "But acceptable. You have won the right to leave this territory. But know this, soldier, I am eternal. This forest is mine. Others will come seeking the power I offer, and not all of them will have your discipline." The remaining pack members gathered around Daniel's body. As I watched, their wolf features began to fade as well. Whatever hold the ancient thing had on them was weakening with their leader's death. "Our agreement included both of you leaving," I said, nodding toward Carl. "Agreements have meaning only between equals. You are still merely human." The thing stepped closer, and I could feel the temperature drop around it. "But you have earned my respect. Take your wounded friend and go. Do not return to this part of the forest. And do not speak of what you have seen here. Asterisk. If you do, I will hunt you in the places where you think you are safe." I didn't argue. I picked up Carl and carried him the last mile to my truck. He was unconscious by then, but still breathing. I got him to the hospital in Fairbanks just in time. The official report listed it as a bear attack. The investigation team found the dead hunters and declared it an unfortunate encounter with wildlife. Daniel Morrison's body was discovered 3 miles from the scene and attributed to the same incident. Carl recovered, but he left Alaska the day he got out of the hospital. Before he went, he told me he wasn't going to talk about what really happened. "Some things," he said, "are better left alone." I went back to my job as a park ranger, but I transferred to a different section of Denali, far from the territory I'd agreed to stay out of. Some promises are worth keeping, even when they're made to monsters. That was 3 years ago. Recently, I've been hearing reports from other rangers, stories about illegal hunters who disappear without a trace, about areas of the forest where the wildlife won't go, about sounds in the night that don't match any known animal. The ancient thing is still out there, still offering power to people who think they can handle it. And judging by the missing person reports, some of them are saying, yes, I keep my transfer paperwork updated and my resignation letter written, because someday something is going to happen in those woods that can't be covered up with talk about bear attacks and unfortunate accidents. When that day comes, they're going to need someone who knows what's really out there, someone who's fought monsters and lived to tell about it, even if nobody believes the telling. My name is Dr. Helen Ravencrest, and I'm a therapist at Fairbanks General Hospital. I've been treating people with mental health problems for 15 years. I thought I'd seen everything until I met David Nightshade. David came to me in February 1981, right after the rescue teams found him alone in the gates of the Arctic National Park. He was the only one left from a 5-person research team that went into the wilderness 3 months earlier. The other 4 were dead. When David walked into my office that first day, I barely recognized him as human. He was so thin I could see his bones through his skin. His hair had turned white, even though he was only 35 years old. But it was his eyes that scared me most. They were like looking into a frozen lake at night. "Doctor," he said in a voice that sounded like wind through dead trees, "I need to tell you what I did to them. What I became out there." I pulled out my notepad and tried to look calm. "Why don't you start at the beginning, David?" He sat down across from me, but he kept looking around the room like he was checking for danger. "We went up there to study how people survive in extreme cold. Doctor, Amanda Frost was our food expert. Professor Carl Winter studied the mind. Lisa Snow was a student, and Tommy Blackus was our guide. Tommy knew the land better than anyone." David's hands shook as he talked. "The plan was simple. Stay out there for 3 months during the polar night, see how our bodies and minds handled it, write a report, come home." "What went wrong?" I asked. David looked at me with those frozen eyes. "I got hungry, doctor. Hungrier than any person should ever get. And when you get that hungry in a place like that, you start wanting things you shouldn't want." I wrote down his words, but something about the way he said hungry made my skin crawl. It didn't sound like he was talking about food. "Tell me about the hunger, David." "It started small. Normal hunger, you know? But we had plenty of food. Military rations, dried meat, even some fresh supplies Tommy brought. But after the first month, nothing tasted right anymore. Everything was like eating cardboard." David stood up and started walking around my office. I noticed he moved differently than other people, like he was hunting something. That's when the dreams started. Dreams about eating fresh meat, raw meat, still warm. He stopped and looked at me. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks, being stuck in a tiny cabin for weeks, barely any sunlight, the cold making everything hurt. But then I started waking up with blood under my fingernails. Blood from what? I didn't know. I thought maybe I was scratching myself in my sleep, but the blood didn't smell like mine. I kept writing, but my hands were getting sweaty. Something about David's story felt too real, too detailed. The others started noticing changes in me. Amanda said I was losing too much weight, even for someone on strict rations. Carl tried to examine my mental state, but I wouldn't let him. And Lisa, poor Lisa, started being afraid of me. Why were they afraid? David sat back down, but this time he sat on the edge of his chair like he might run at any moment. "Because I was changing, doctor, growing taller. My hearing got so good I could hear their heartbeats from across the cabin. I could smell their fear. And I liked it." I looked at David carefully. He was tall, maybe 6.5 feet, but that wasn't impossible. Some people are just big. "David, isolation can make us imagine things that aren't really happening." He laughed. But it didn't sound like a human laugh. That's what Carl said. Right up until I ate him. The room got very quiet. I could hear my own heartbeat, and I wondered if David could hear it too. "You ate Professor Winter?" "I ate all of them, doctor. One by one. And the worst part is..." David leaned forward, and I could see that his teeth looked sharper than they should. "The worst part is how good they tasted." David continued his story, and I tried to keep writing even though my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Tommy was first. Our guide, the one who knew the land. He tried to warn us before we even got to the cabin. Said we were going into Wendigo country. Said some places in the Arctic don't like visitors. Wendigo? An old native story. A creature that was once human, but got so hungry it started eating people. Once you taste human flesh, you can never go back. You just get hungrier and hungrier until you're not human anymore. David got up and walked to my window. Outside, snow was falling, even though it was only October. Tommy told us these stories around the campfire our first night. We all laughed. Smart people from the university, laughing at old superstitions. What happened to Tommy? Second week in, We woke up and he was gone. Just gone. His sleeping bag was empty, but there was no sign of a struggle. No footprints leading away from the cabin. Carl thought maybe he had a mental breakdown and wandered off into the snow. Amanda thought wild animals got him. David turned back to me. But I knew better. Because I could remember doing it. Remember doing what? Killing him. Eating him. I remembered the taste of his blood, the way his bones cracked between my teeth. But I also remembered sleeping in my bunk all night. Both memories felt completely real. I wrote this down, but I was starting to feel sick. David, trauma can create false memories. Your mind might be, "Doctor? Can trauma create this?" David rolled up his sleeve. His arm was covered in scars that looked like bite marks, but they were too big to be human bites. The teeth marks were at least 3 inches long. Did you do this to yourself? That's what I thought at first. But look closer. I didn't want to look closer, but I did. The bite marks were healed, but they were deep, and they were in places David couldn't have reached himself. These marks appeared the night Tommy disappeared. When I woke up, my mouth was full of blood, and these were on my arms, like something had been trying to bite pieces off me. David sat back down. The others found blood in the snow outside the cabin the next morning. Lots of blood, but no body. Nothing left of Tommy except stains in the snow and the taste in my mouth. What did the team do? Carl wanted to leave immediately. He said the isolation was affecting everyone's mental health. Amanda agreed. But the radio wasn't working anymore, and we were too far from civilization to walk out. We were trapped. David smiled, and I saw that his teeth really were sharper than they should be. That's when I started getting really hungry. Describe the hunger. It wasn't like normal hunger, doctor. Normal hunger makes you want food. This hunger made me want specific things. I would look at Amanda and think about how tender the meat on her arms would be. I would watch Carl sleep and wonder what his heart would taste like. I put down my pen. David, these thoughts are symptoms of severe psychological stress. The isolation, the cold, the loss of your teammate. Is psychological stress supposed to make you grow 4 inches taller? Because that's what happened next. I had to duck to get through doorways I'd walked through normally just days before. I looked at David. He was very tall, but people don't grow when they're adults. That's not medically possible. Amanda measured me. She was a scientist, very careful about everything. I was 6 feet 2 inches when we arrived. After Tommy disappeared, I was 6 feet 6 inches. A week later, I was 6 feet 10 inches. Maybe the measurements were wrong. She used the same measuring tape every time. Made marks on the wall. You could watch me getting taller day by day. David's voice got quieter and hungrier. Always hungrier. Tell me about Amanda. David closed his eyes. Amanda tried to help me. She thought maybe I had some kind of disease that was making me grow and affecting my mind. She started giving me extra food, hoping that would help with the hunger. Did it help? For about an hour after I ate, I felt normal. Almost human. But then the hunger would come back worse than before. And it wasn't hunger for food anymore. It was hunger for her. David opened his eyes and looked right at me. Do you know what it's like to be hungry for another person, doctor? Not sexually hungry, literally hungry. To look at someone and see them as meat? I didn't answer because I didn't know what to say. I fought it for days, tried to stay away from her. But she kept trying to help me, kept coming closer. And one night, while she was sleeping, what happened? I ate her heart first. It was still beating when I bit into it. The room felt very cold. I realized I had stopped breathing. But here's the strange thing, doctor. When I woke up the next morning, Amanda was still alive. She was making breakfast like nothing had happened. But I could still taste her blood in my mouth. And there were new bite marks on my arms. David kept talking, but I was starting to feel dizzy. His story was impossible, but the way he told it, it felt true. Carl tried to examine me after Amanda's death. Because she did die, doctor. The next morning, we found her in her sleeping bag. Her chest was torn open, heart missing. But I remembered her making breakfast. I remembered both things happening. How did the others react? Carl said, I was having a complete mental breakdown, said the isolation had made me dangerous. Lisa agreed with him. They started planning to tie me up until rescue came. David stood and walked around my office again. I noticed he didn't make any sound when he moved, even though he was wearing heavy boots. That night, Carl tried to sedate me. He had medical training, carried emergency drugs, but when he stuck the needle in my arm, nothing happened. It was like my body burned through the drugs immediately. What do you mean? I felt the sedative hit my bloodstream, felt it starting to work, but then it was gone, burned away by whatever I was becoming. David touched one of the scars on his arm. That's when Carl realized I wasn't just having a breakdown. What did he realize? That I really was changing into something else, something that used to be human but wasn't anymore. David sat back down, but this time he didn't sit in the chair. He crouched on it like an animal getting ready to pounce. Carl started reading Tommy's books. Tommy had brought some old Native American texts about the Wendigo. Carl was looking for answers. Did he find any? He found out that once the transformation starts, it can't be stopped. The Wendigo gets hungrier and hungrier, and it has to feed. It doesn't want to feed, but it has to. David's voice got very sad. Carl tried to help me fight it. He really did. But when the hunger got too strong, you killed him too? I remember talking to him one evening. He was explaining the Wendigo legend, trying to help me understand what was happening. Then, I remember nothing. Next thing I knew, it was morning, and Carl was gone. Gone how? Pieces of him were scattered around the cabin, like something had torn him apart and eaten him bit by bit. David looked at his hands. My fingernails were full of his flesh. I looked at David's hands. His fingernails were long and yellow, more like claws than human nails. But doctor, here's what really scared me. After I ate Carl, the hunger went away for almost a whole day. For 24 hours, I felt completely normal, human. I was horrified by what I'd done. You felt guilty? More than guilty. I felt like a monster. I wanted to kill myself rather than hurt anyone else. But then the hunger came back, stronger than ever. And there was only Lisa left. David put his head in his hands. Poor Lisa. She was just a kid, 22 years old, working on her graduate degree. She didn't deserve what I did to her. What did you do? She tried to run, got the snowmobile started somehow, tried to escape, but I chased her. On foot, I could run faster than the snowmobile could drive through the snow. My legs had gotten longer, stronger. I caught up to her about 2 miles from the cabin. David looked up at me with tears in his eyes. She begged me not to hurt her, promised she wouldn't tell anyone what happened if I just let her go. But I was so hungry, doctor. So incredibly hungry. David, if this really happened, how are you sitting here talking to me? Shouldn't you still be hungry? David smiled, and his sharp teeth caught the light from my desk lamp. Who says I'm not still hungry, doctor? The room suddenly felt very small. I realized I was alone in my office with someone who believed he was a cannibal monster, someone who might actually be dangerous. David, I think we should call someone, maybe get you admitted to the hospital for observation. That won't help. David stood up, and he seemed even taller than before. 'Cause I'm not crazy, doctor. I really did become something else out there. And now I have to feed again. I reached for my phone, but David was across the room so fast I barely saw him move. He grabbed my wrist with fingers that felt like ice. Don't be afraid, doctor. You're going to help me understand what I am. What I've become. His grip was so strong I couldn't pull away. David, let me go. I can hear your heartbeat, doctor. It's very fast. You smell like fear and something else. Something that makes me hungry. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. But don't worry, David said, softly. I'm not going to hurt you. Not yet. I need you to help me first. He let go of my wrist and sat back down like nothing had happened. Tell me, doctor, in all your years of treating people, have you ever seen anyone like me? I rubbed my wrist where David had grabbed it. There were marks that looked like frostbite, even though we were inside a heated building. David, what you're describing isn't medically possible. People don't transform into monsters. Don't they? David tilted his head like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. What if I told you that right now I can hear 3 heartbeats in the room next door? What if I told you that the orderly who walked by in the hallway 2 minutes ago smells like cigarettes and fear? I hadn't heard any orderly walk by, but then I heard footsteps in the hallway. An orderly appeared at my door. Dr. Ravencrest, is everything okay? I thought I heard. Never mind. Just checking. The orderly left, and I smelled cigarette smoke lingering in the air. How did you know that? Because I'm not human anymore, doctor. I tried to tell you, but you won't believe me. You want to find a scientific explanation for everything. David stood up and walked to my bookshelf. He picked up a heavy medical textbook with one hand and crushed it like paper. Explain that scientifically. I stared at the destroyed book. David, please sit down. Let's talk about this calmly. There's nothing calm about what I am. David's voice was getting deeper, rougher. Do you want to know what really happened to Lisa? I didn't want to know, but I nodded. I caught her about 2 miles from the cabin. She was crying, begging me to let her go. And for a moment, I almost did. For just a moment, I remembered being human. David's eyes weren't just cold anymore. They were completely black. But then the hunger took over. I grabbed her off the snowmobile and... David paused. Do you really want to hear this, doctor? Tell me. I bit her throat out first. Clean bite. She died quickly. I didn't want her to suffer. But then I ate her. All of her. Bones and all. It took me 3 hours. I was writing this down, but my hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the pen. When I was finished, the hunger went away completely. For the first time in weeks, I felt satisfied. But I also felt different. Stronger. More changed. How did you get rescued? I walked out. Walked 200 miles through snow and ice. Took me 4 days. No food, no water, no rest. Just walked. David moved closer to my desk. That's not humanly possible, doctor. A normal person would have died in the first day. But I wasn't normal anymore. David, even if what you're saying is true, you're here now. You're talking to me rationally. That suggests you're still human. David laughed, and the sound made my bones hurt. Am I talking rationally, doctor? Or am I just a dumb, very smart monster who's learned to pretend? He leaned over my desk. Tell me something. How long have we been talking? I looked at my clock. We'd started at 2 p.m. The clock now said 6:30 p.m. 4.5 hours, but that's impossible. I only scheduled 1 hour. Time moves differently around me now. Haven't you noticed? The sun was shining when I came in. Look outside. I looked out my window. It was completely dark outside, and snow was falling heavily. But it had been a clear afternoon when David arrived. David, what's happening? I'm showing you what I really am, doctor. What the hunger made me become. David's voice was changing, becoming something that wasn't quite human. And now you're going to help me understand if there's any way to go back. Go back to what? To being human. To not being hungry all the time. David was now standing directly over me. Because, doctor, I'm getting very hungry again. And you smell so good. I tried to stand up, but my legs wouldn't work. David, you need help. Medical help. I need food, doctor. Fresh food. Still warm. David's hands had become claws. His teeth were definitely not human anymore, and he was getting taller, stretching up toward the ceiling. But first, I need you to tell me something. In all your psychiatric training, did you ever read about anything like me? Any cases? Any studies? Anything? I could barely speak. No. Nothing like this. Then maybe I'm not crazy after all. David smiled with his mouth full of sharp teeth. Maybe I really did become a monster out there in the snow. The lights in my office went out. I could hear David moving in the darkness, but I couldn't see him. Don't worry, doctor. His voice came from somewhere above me. I can see you perfectly, and you look delicious, I screamed. I woke up the next morning in my office chair. Sunlight was streaming through my windows. My appointment book was open on my desk, and, according to my notes, I had seen David Nightshade yesterday from 2 to 3 p.m., a completely normal session. I looked at what I had written. Patient shows signs of severe PTSD, following survival ordeal. Exhibits guilt over teammates' deaths and some cannibalistic ideation. Recommend continued therapy and psychiatric evaluation. Normal notes, professional notes, nothing about wendigos or transformations or impossible strength. But my wrist still had frostbite marks where David had grabbed me, and my medical textbook was still crushed on the floor. I called the hospital records department. Can you tell me about David Nightshade's admission? David Nightshade. Let me see. Yes, He was brought in 3 days ago. Sole survivor of an expedition in Alaska. 4 teammates died in what appears to be animal attacks. Bears, most likely. Animal attacks? Yes, doctor. The bodies were partially consumed. Very tragic. I hung up the phone and tried to think. Which version was real? The David who told me an impossible story about becoming a monster? Or the David in my professional notes, who was just a traumatized man with survivor's guilt? That afternoon, I had another appointment scheduled. David Nightshade, 3 p.m. He arrived exactly on time. He looked perfectly normal. Average height, normal teeth, regular fingernails. He sat down across from me and smiled. Good afternoon, doctor. I hope you're feeling better today. Better? You seemed very upset yesterday when I left. I was worried I might have frightened you with my story. I looked at my notes from yesterday. Normal notes. Nothing frightening. David, yesterday you told me you were transforming into a Wendigo. David looked confused. Doctor, I think you might be misremembering our conversation. I told you about the animal attacks that killed my team. We discussed my survivor's guilt. Don't you remember? I stared at him. He seemed completely sincere. You said you ate your teammates. Doctor, are you feeling all right? That's a very disturbing thing to suggest. I would never. David looked hurt. My teammates were killed by bears. I barely escaped with my life. I looked at my wrist. The frostbite marks were gone. David, how tall are you? 5'10", same as always. Doctor, I'm concerned about you. You seem confused. I measured him. 5'10" exactly. We finished the session. David scheduled another appointment for next week. He left my office, and I sat there trying to understand what was real. But that night, I had dreams about sharp teeth and black eyes. I dreamed about being very hungry for something I couldn't name, and when I woke up, I found snow on my bedroom floor, even though all my windows were closed. I went to work the next day and checked David's file. The only notes I could find were normal psychiatric evaluations. No mention of monsters or impossible stories. But when I opened my desk drawer, I found something that shouldn't have been there. A piece of paper with writing that wasn't mine. The hunger never goes away, doctor, and soon you'll understand why. Thank you for being so delicious. D.N. I threw the paper away and tried to forget about it. But sometimes, late at night, I get very hungry. Hungrier than any person should ever get. And I find myself looking at people differently, wondering what they might taste like. My colleagues say I've been losing weight, getting taller, that my eyes look strange in certain light. I tell them it's just stress, but deep down, I know the truth. Some hungers, once awakened, can never be satisfied. And some stories, once heard, become real, whether you believe them or not. I've scheduled my last appointment for next Friday. After that, I think I'll take a vacation. Somewhere cold and remote, where there aren't many people around. Just to be safe, because I'm getting very, very hungry. And winter is coming. My name is Angela Ravenclaw, and I should have never come back to Alaska. I pulled my truck into the gravel driveway and stared at my grandmother's cabin. The August rain drummed on my windshield, making everything look blurry and wrong. 7 years I'd been gone. 7 years working as a park ranger in Colorado, tracking lost hikers and finding missing people. I was good at my job. Really good. I'd never lost anyone on my watch. But sitting there in the truck, looking at the dark windows of the cabin where I grew up, I felt like a scared kid again. The Tongass National Forest stretched out behind the house like a green wall. Millions of acres of rainforest, deeper and darker than anything in the lower 48. I used to love these woods. Now they just made me nervous. I grabbed my duffel bag and ran for the front door. The key was where it always was, under the carved raven my grandmother had made when I was little. The door creaked when I pushed it open. Everything inside smelled like cedar smoke and old books. "Hello, house," I whispered. It was something I used to do as a kid, stupid maybe, but it felt right. The cabin looked exactly the same. Grandmother's reading chair by the window, her collection of carved animals on the mantelpiece, the old photos of our family covering one whole wall. Most of them showed Tlingit ancestors I'd never met. My parents were there too, young and smiling before the fishing accident that killed them when I was 8. I dropped my bag and walked to the kitchen. Grandmother had left me a note on the table, written in her careful handwriting. Angela. You are the last of our line. The forest needs a guardian. Look in the cellar when you're ready. Be careful, child. The old ways are strong here. Love, grandmother times. I read it 3 times. Guardian of what? Grandmother had always talked about protecting the forest, but I thought she just meant from pollution and careless campers. My stomach growled. I hadn't eaten since Juneau. I opened the refrigerator and found it empty, except for some old milk and pickles. But in the freezer, wrapped in butcher paper, was a huge piece of red meat. It looked almost black in the dim light, raw, fresh. For some reason, my mouth started watering. I couldn't remember the last time I'd wanted raw meat. I was reaching for it when the phone rang. Angela? This is Tom Bridgers from the Forest Service. Oh, hi Tom, I knew the name. He ran search and rescue for this district. Sorry to bother you, but we heard you were back in town. We've got a situation here. Missing hiker. College kid from Seattle disappeared 3 days ago. Experienced backpacker, good gear. We've searched everywhere we can think of. I'm not officially working, I said. I'm just here to settle my grandmother's estate. I know, but... He paused. We could really use your help. You know these woods better than anyone, and your record speaks for itself. Never lost one, right? He was right. In 7 years, I'd found every single missing person alive. It was like I had a 6th sense for tracking people. Other rangers called it luck, but I knew it was more than that. I could almost smell where people had been, follow trails that didn't exist. Okay, I said. I'll take a look. Great, meet us at the ranger station tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. After I hung up, I walked around the cabin. Every room held memories. This was where grandmother taught me to identify animal tracks. Here was where she showed me which plants were safe to eat. And there, in her bedroom, was the old trunk I'd never been allowed to open. I tried the lid, locked, but the wood was old and soft. I could probably break it open. But something about grandmother's note made me hesitate. Look in the cellar when you're ready. Was I ready? For what? Instead, I went to bed early, but sleep wouldn't come. I kept thinking about the missing hiker, about the meat in the freezer, about grandmother's strange note. And outside, I could hear things moving in the forest. Big things. Around midnight, I finally drifted off. That's when the dream started. I was running through the woods, but not like a person runs. I was on all fours, moving faster than humanly possible. Trees flashed past me. I could smell everything. Mice in the underbrush, fish in the streams, and something else. Something that didn't belong in the forest. Humans. In the dream, I hunted them. I woke up with dirt under my fingernails. I sat up in bed, staring at my hands. The nails were longer than they'd been yesterday, and they were caked with forest soil. My feet were dirty too, like I'd been walking outside barefoot. But that was impossible. I'd been asleep all night, hadn't I? At the ranger station, Tom Bridgers introduced me to the search team. 5 good men and women, all experienced. They'd been combing the forest for 3 days, looking for Jason Hendricks, age 22, last seen heading towards Sacred Grove Trail. Sacred Grove? I asked. That's deep forest. Why would a day hiker go there? He wasn't a day hiker, said Maria Santos, one of the rangers. Kid was doing some kind of research project on old-growth forests. Had permits to camp for a week. Tom spread out a map on the table. We found his base camp here, about 5 miles in. Tent was still set up, food still hanging in the bear bag. But Jason was gone. Any sign of struggle? That's the weird part. No sign of anything. It's like he just vanished. I studied the map. Sacred Grove was in the heart of the forest, where the trees were so old and thick that noon looked like twilight. Grandmother had taken me there once when I was 12. She'd called it a holy place, somewhere the spirits lived. I'll start from his camp and work outward, I said. Give me until tomorrow evening. You sure you want to go alone? Tom asked. It's dangerous country. I work better alone. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. Lately, I'd been having problems working with other people. I got agitated, aggressive. like I needed more space, more territory. My supervisor in Colorado had suggested I take some time off. He'd been polite about it, but I could tell he was concerned. The hike to Jason's camp took me 3 hours. The forest felt different than I remembered. Wilder. The trees seemed taller, the shadows deeper. Animals went quiet when I approached, then started making noise again after I passed. Like they were tracking me. Jason's camp was exactly like Tom had described. Clean and organized. His sleeping bag was laid out in the tent, his stove was assembled, his food was properly stored. But Jason was gone. I started looking for tracks. The soil around the campsite was soft from recent rain, perfect for holding footprints. I found Jason's boot prints easily, size 10 hiking boots with a distinctive waffle tread. They led away from camp toward the deeper forest. But there were other tracks, too. Barefoot human prints, much larger than Jason's. At least size 14, maybe bigger. The toes were long and spread wide, like someone who'd never worn shoes, and they were deep. Whoever made them was heavy, very heavy. I followed both sets of tracks. Jason's prints showed he'd been walking normally at first, maybe just exploring, but after about 100 yards, his stride changed. He'd started running. The barefoot tracks stayed right beside his, matching his pace perfectly. I followed the trail for an hour, moving deeper into the forest. The trees got bigger, older, the air got colder, and the light? There was something wrong with the light. It was only 3 in the afternoon, but it felt like dusk. Then I found the first piece of Jason's clothing. His jacket was hanging from a branch, about 8 feet off the ground. It was torn down the front, like something with claws had ripped it open, but there was no blood on it. I kept following the tracks. Both sets continued deeper into the forest, but now Jason's prints were erratic. He was stumbling, falling, getting up again, running for his life. A quarter-mile further, I found his backpack. It was opened, and the contents scattered, but nothing was missing. His water bottles, his GPS, his emergency beacon, all there. Why would someone attack him but not take his gear? The tracks led to a small clearing surrounded by massive cedar trees. And there, in the center of the clearing, I found Jason. He was arranged like he was sleeping, lying on his back with his hands folded over his chest. His eyes were closed. At first, I thought maybe he'd just collapsed from exhaustion. Then I saw his throat. 3 deep claw marks had torn it open. The cuts were too wide for a bear, too clean for a wolf. And they were precise, surgical almost. Whatever had killed him knew exactly where to strike. I knelt beside the body, trying to stay professional. I'd seen death before, but this was different. Jason had been arranged with care, almost reverently. His remaining clothes were smoothed down. Someone had cleaned the blood from his face. The barefoot tracks circled the clearing, then disappeared into the underbrush. I called it in on my radio, then waited for the recovery team. While I waited, I studied the scene more carefully. No drag marks leading to the clearing. Jason had walked here under his own power, then died. But why would he follow someone into the deepest part of the forest? Unless he hadn't been following. Unless he'd been herded. That night, back at the cabin, I couldn't eat. I kept thinking about Jason's throat, about those precise claw marks. I called Tom to give my report. "Looks like an animal attack," I said. "But I've never seen anything like it." "What kind of animal?" I hesitated. "I'm not sure. The tracks were unusual. I'll write up a full report tomorrow." But I already knew I wouldn't put everything in that report. The arrangement of the body, the careful positioning, the almost ritualistic nature of the scene, that wasn't something an animal would do. That was something that thought like a human, but killed like a monster. 2 more hikers disappeared over the next week. Sarah Chen, 26, a nature photographer from Portland. She'd been documenting old-growth trees for a magazine article. Found her camera 3 days later, hanging from a branch 12 feet up. The last photos showed massive trees, then shadows, then nothing. Mark Rivera, 34, an experienced outdoorsman from Anchorage. He'd been alone on a multi-day hiking trip. We found his tent shredded like paper, his gear scattered across a quarter-mile radius. No body this time. I found both scenes. Tom kept asking me to investigate because I was the only one who could follow the tracks. The same. Barefoot prints were at every site, but they never led anywhere useful. They just vanished into the deep forest like whoever made them could walk on air. The weird thing was, I was getting better at tracking them. Not just following the footprints, but sensing where they'd been. I'd stand in the forest and just know which direction to go. It was like I could smell the trail, even when there was no trail to see. My dreams were getting worse too. Every night, I'd dream about running through the forest on all fours, hunting things that didn't belong. I'd wake up exhausted, with dirt under my nails and scratches on my arms that I couldn't remember getting. One morning, I found blood on my teeth. "You need to see a doctor," I told myself in the bathroom mirror. My reflection looked strange. My eyes seemed brighter, more alert, my canine teeth looked sharper, and my hair was growing faster than normal. But I couldn't leave. Not with people disappearing. Not when I was the only one who could track the killer. Tom called me into the station that afternoon. He had photographs spread across his desk, crime scene photos from all 3 disappearance sites. "Look at these tracks again," he said. "Tell me what you see." I studied the photos. The bare footprints were clear in every shot. Large, deep, human-shaped, but wrong somehow. "They're too big," I said. "And look at the toe spread. No human foot naturally spreads that wide." That's what I thought. So I sent the measurements to Dr. Patricia Williams at the University of Alaska. She's an expert on cryptozoology. Cryptozoology? The study of unknown animals. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, that kind of thing. I laughed, but it sounded forced even to me. "You think Bigfoot is killing hikers?" "I think something is killing hikers, and it's not a bear or a wolf. Look at these measurements." He pulled out a sheet of paper, covered with calculations. Footprint length, 18 inches. Width, 7 inches. Estimated weight, over 400 pounds. Estimated height, 7 to 8 feet. That's impossible. Is it? Angela, you know these woods better than anyone. You've heard the stories. Your grandmother used to tell them. He was right. Grandmother had told stories about things in the deep forest. Giants that protected sacred places. Spirits that took animal form. I'd always thought they were just stories. Even if something like that existed, I said, why would it suddenly start killing people? These woods have been here for thousands of years. Maybe it's territorial. Maybe something changed recently that made it more aggressive. I thought about that as I drove home. What had changed? The forest looked the same. The weather was normal for August. The only thing that was different was, I'd come home. That night, I decided to read grandmother's journals. I'd found a stack of them in her bedroom, all written in her careful handwriting. Most were in English, but some passages were in Tlingit, which I could barely read. The journals went back decades, page after page of observations about the forest, about animal behavior, about the changing seasons. But there were other entries too, strange ones. Asterisk, the 15th of June, 1987. The guardian spirit is restless. The sacred groves need protection. Too many outsiders coming into the deep forest. Asterisk, asterisk. The 3rd of August, 1988. Had to intervene again last night. 3 college students camping where they shouldn't. Led them out safely, but they won't remember the experience clearly. Asterisk, asterisk. The 12th of October, 1988. Angela shows the signs. Enhanced senses, unusual strength, territorial instincts. The bloodline is strong in her. When she comes of age, the choice will be hers. Asterisk. My hands started shaking. I flipped through more pages, looking for entries about me. Asterisk. The 20th of December, 1988. Angela left for college today. It's better this way. The transformation doesn't happen unless she stays in the ancestral territory. Perhaps she'll build a different life. Asterisk, asterisk, the 14th of March, 1989. Getting too old for the guardian duties. The forest suffers without proper protection. Angela must choose soon. Asterisk, I slammed the journal shut. This was crazy. Grandmother had always been eccentric, but this sounded like fantasy. But what if it wasn't? I walked to the kitchen and opened the freezer. The raw meat was still there, looking fresher than it should after a week. I pulled it out and unwrapped it. It was deep red, almost purple, and it smelled good. Really good. Before I knew what I was doing, I bit into it. The taste exploded across my tongue, rich, warm, perfect. I ate the entire piece, tearing at it with my teeth. It was the best thing I'd ever tasted. When I finished, I looked at my hands. They were covered in blood. My fingernails had grown longer while I ate, and they were sharp now. Really sharp. I ran to the bathroom mirror. My reflection showed a stranger. My eyes were bright, yellow. My teeth were pointed. And my face was changing shape, becoming longer, more angular. As I watched, my features slowly shifted back to normal, but my eyes stayed yellow for a long time. That night, I dreamed I was hunting Mark Rivera. In the dream, I could smell his fear as he ran through the forest. I could hear his heartbeat from a quarter-mile away. I followed him effortlessly, herding him toward the deep woods where no one would find him. When I caught him, I didn't kill him right away. First, I looked into his eyes and made sure he understood what was happening. Made sure he knew he'd entered sacred territory without permission. Then I opened his throat with one swipe of my claws. I woke up screaming. I found Mark's body the next morning. He was arranged like Jason had been, lying peacefully in a clearing, hands folded, wounds cleaned. But this time, I knew I hadn't discovered the scene. This time, I remembered creating it. The memories came flooding back as I stood over Mark's corpse, running through the forest in a form that wasn't quite human, feeling his terror as I hunted him. The satisfaction of protecting sacred ground from an intruder. And the hunger. God, the hunger was incredible. I knelt beside Mark's body, trying to understand what was happening to me. My hands shook as I reached for my radio to call it in, but before I could speak, I heard voices in the distance. A search team was coming. Without thinking, I melted into the forest. One moment I was standing in the clearing. The next I was 50 yards away, hidden behind a massive cedar. I'd moved without conscious thought, faster than any human could move. I watched through the trees as Tom and 3 other rangers found Mark's body. I heard Tom radio for the medical examiner. I saw them set up a crime scene perimeter, and I realized I was studying them like prey. The yellow-eyed thing inside me was measuring distances, calculating attack patterns, identifying the weakest member of the group. It would be so easy to circle around behind them, to take them one by one before they knew what was happening. I bit down on my tongue until I tasted blood. The pain helped me think clearly. I was still human. I could still choose. I backed away from the search team and headed home. In the cabin, I went straight to the cellar. Grandmother's note had said to look there when I was ready. I was more than ready now. I was desperate. The cellar door was heavy oak, carved with symbols I recognized from the artifacts upstairs. Tlingit designs, but older somehow, more primitive. I pulled the door open and walked down wooden steps that creaked under my weight. The cellar was bigger than it should have been, extending back under the forest floor. The walls were lined with shelves holding jars of things I didn't want to identify. But at the far end, on a stone altar, sat another journal. This one was bound in leather that looked and smelled like not cow, something else. The first page was written in grandmother's handwriting, but the ink looked fresh. Asterisk, Angela. If you're reading this, the change has begun. You are the guardian now, whether you choose to be or not. Our bloodline has protected these forests for over 1,000 years. Each generation, one woman carries the burden. Asterisk, asterisk. The transformation cannot be stopped, only controlled. You can fight it and go mad, or you can accept it and learn to use it wisely. The choice is yours, but know this, the forest will have its protector. If you refuse, the hunger will consume you completely. Asterisk. I flipped through the pages. They were filled with instructions, rituals, warnings. How to control the change, how to distinguish between legitimate threats and innocent visitors, how to arrange bodies so they looked like animal attacks. And rules. So many rules. Asterisk. Never kill children. Asterisk. Asterisk. Never hunt in groups larger than you can handle. Asterisk, asterisk. Never let anyone see you transform. Asterisk, asterisk. Never hunt the same area twice in 1 month. Asterisk, asterisk. Always arrange the evidence to suggest natural predators. Asterisk. At the back of the book was a map of the Tongass, marked with territories. areas where guardians had operated for centuries, areas where the forest was still wild and sacred. My area was the largest. I sat on the cellar floor and tried to process everything. I was becoming something inhuman, a killer, a monster that protected sacred forests by murdering anyone who wandered too deep into them. But was that really evil? These woods had been here for thousands of years. The trees I'd seen today were already ancient when white settlers first reached Alaska. Didn't they deserve protection from people who saw them as nothing more than resources to exploit? Mark hadn't been evil. Neither had Jason or Sarah. But they'd entered sacred territory without understanding what that meant. They'd walked carelessly through places where their ancestors were buried, where spirits lived, where the old ways still mattered. I thought about the search teams, stumbling through the forest with their radios and GPS units and modern equipment. They had no idea what lived in these woods. They thought nature was something to be managed, controlled, used. Maybe they needed to learn respect. A new voice spoke in my head then, deeper and rougher than my own thoughts. Asterisk. They are weak. They do not belong here. The forest will be cleaner without them. Asterisk. I recognized that voice. It was the thing I became in my dreams, the guardian, the hunter. And it was hungry. I climbed out of the cellar and locked the door behind me. But I kept the journal. I needed to understand what was happening to me, what I was becoming. As evening approached, I felt the change starting. My bones began to ache. My vision got sharper. My hearing became so acute I could distinguish individual heartbeats from the small animals outside. And I could smell them. The search team was camped 2 miles away, but I could smell their sweat, their fear, their human weakness. I tried to fight it, but the transformation came anyway. My body stretched and grew. Thick hair sprouted from my arms and legs. My fingernails became claws. My teeth became fangs. When it was over, I stood 7 feet tall and weighed at least 400 pounds. I looked like the thing from the footprint photographs. I looked like a monster. But I still thought like Angela Ravenclaw. And Angela Ravenclaw knew there were 5 people camped in her forest who didn't belong there. I found them just after midnight. The search team had made camp in a clearing near Raven Creek. 5 people in 3 tents, thinking they were safe because they had radios and emergency beacons and official authority. They had no idea they were being stalked by something that had been hunting these woods longer than their civilization had existed. I crouched, in the shadows at the edge of their camp, watching them sleep. The guardian part of my mind cataloged everything: tent positions, equipment locations, escape routes. It would be simple to take them all, quick and clean, before they could even scream for help. But the human part of my mind, the part that was still Angela, rebelled. These weren't tourists or thrill seekers. They were professionals doing their jobs, trying to protect people. Tom Bridgers had 2 kids at home. Maria Santos was getting married next month. They were good people. Asterisk. They are intruders. Asterisk. The guardian voice hissed in my head. Asterisk. They desecrate sacred ground with their presence. The forest demands their blood. Asterisk. No, I whispered. My voice came out as a low growl that made one of the campers stir in his sleep. I backed away from the camp, fighting every instinct that told me to attack. The hunger was incredible, like a physical pain in my stomach. I could almost taste their fear, their flesh, their life force. But I turned away. I spent the rest of the night patrolling the forest boundaries, marking my territory in ways that would keep other search teams from getting too close. When morning came, I felt the transformation reversing. My body shrank back to human size. My claws became fingernails. My fangs became normal teeth. By dawn, I was Angela Ravenclaw again. But I could still smell the search team. I walked back to camp just as they were packing up. Tom saw me coming through the trees and waved. Angela. Perfect timing. We were just about to head back. Find anything last night? Some tracks, I lied. But they led to a rock face. Dead end. Well, we recovered Mark's body. Medical examiner says it was definitely an animal attack. Probably a bear. I nodded. That makes sense. I'll keep looking, but maybe you should pull the other search teams back. If there's a rogue bear in the area, we don't want more casualties. Tom agreed. Within an hour, the forest was empty except for me. I spent the day reading grandmother's journal, learning about my new reality. The transformation would happen every few nights now, whether I wanted it or not. I could learn to control it, to direct the hunger, but I could never stop it completely. I had a choice to make. I could leave Alaska and try to build a normal life somewhere else, but according to the journal, that would only delay the inevitable. The guardian spirit would eventually drive me insane if I didn't fulfill my purpose. Or I could accept what I was becoming and learn to use it responsibly. That evening, I got a call from Tom. We've got another missing hiker. Solo backpacker named David Walsh. Last seen heading toward the Sacred Grove Trail. I'll handle it, I said. But this time, I wasn't going to search for David Walsh. I was going to hunt him. I found him just as the sun was setting, about 3 miles into the forest. He was young, maybe 25, with expensive gear and an arrogant attitude. I watched him from the shadows as he set up camp in a grove of ancient cedars, sacred trees that had been standing for over 1,000 years. He was playing music from a portable speaker, loud electronic beats that sent birds fleeing and made the forest go silent with fear. Asterisk, desecration, asterisk, the guardian voice whispered. Asterisk, he mocks the sacred places. Asterisk. This time, I agreed. I waited until full dark, then let the transformation begin. As my body changed, my human conscience faded into the background. The guardian took control. David never knew what hit him. I was faster than any human, stronger than any bear. I could see perfectly in the absolute darkness of the forest. He was fumbling with a flashlight when I emerged from the trees. The look on his face was perfect. Pure terror as he realized he was face to face with something that shouldn't exist. I didn't kill him immediately. First, I destroyed his camp, shredding his tent and scattering his gear. I wanted him to understand that his arrogance had consequences. Then I herded him deeper into the forest, letting him run until his lungs burned and his legs gave out. Only when he collapsed in exhaustion did I end it. Quick and clean, like the others. When it was over, I arranged his body carefully and cleaned away the blood. Then I scattered evidence to make it look like a bear attack. By morning, there would be nothing left but another tragic encounter with Alaska's dangerous wildlife. As I walked home through the pre-dawn darkness, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Peace. The hunger was satisfied, the forest was protected, the sacred groves were safe for another night. I was a monster now. But I was a monster with a purpose. Over the following months, I developed a system. I kept my job as a ranger, which gave me access to information about who was entering the forest. Most visitors were harmless. Day hikers, nature photographers, families with children. I let them pass unmolested. But the ones who showed disrespect for sacred places, who littered or vandalized or disturbed wildlife for their own entertainment, those ones disappeared. I became very good at making it look accidental. The Tlingit elders knew what I was, of course. They'd been waiting for a new guardian for years. They didn't speak to me directly. That would have been too dangerous for both of us, but I sometimes found offerings left near the cabin. Food, supplies, medicines that helped with the pain of transformation. They understood that some traditions were older than law, older than civilization. They understood that the forest needed a protector. 6 months later, I got a letter from the University of Washington. A professor of environmental studies wanted to bring a group of graduate students to study old-growth ecosystems in the Tongass. 30 students. 3 weeks in the deep forest, camping, in areas that had been sacred for generations. I wrote back immediately, explaining that the area was currently closed due to aggressive wildlife activity. Too dangerous for research groups. But they came anyway. I guess some people just don't listen to warnings. The forest is quieter now. Word has spread through the backpacking community that the Tongass is dangerous, unpredictable. People are more careful about where they camp, more respectful of areas marked as culturally sensitive. I still work as a ranger during the day, helping lost hikers and maintaining trails. But at night, when the moon is dark and the forest calls to me, I become something else. I become the thing that keeps the balance. The thing that ensures some places remain wild. My name is Angela Ravenclaw, and I am the guardian of the Tongass National Forest. I protect sacred places from those who would destroy them. I preserve the old ways in a world that has forgotten them. Some might call me a monster. But the forest knows better. The forest knows I am exactly what it needs. My name is Benny Crowkiller, and I should never have been sent to Alaska. 3 months ago, I was a park ranger in the Florida Everglades, where the biggest worry was tourists getting too close to alligators. Then I made what my supervisor called the mistake of the century. I accidentally released 23 endangered Florida panthers into a crowded campground during spring break. The evacuation took 6 hours, 2 helicopters, and cost the Park Service more money than I'll ever see in my lifetime. So here I was, driving a beaten-up ranger truck through the middle of nowhere in Wrangell Street, Elias National Park, Alaska, in November. The snow was already 3 feet deep, and I was wearing summer gear because nobody told me how cold it gets up here. My breath made little clouds in the truck cab, and I could barely feel my fingers on the steering wheel. The radio crackled to life. "Crowkiller, you there?" It was my new boss, Supervisor Harris, calling from the warm office. "Back in town." "Yeah, I'm here," I said, trying not to let my teeth chatter into the microphone. "About 20 miles from the hunting lodge." "Good. Remember, this should be simple. Just a wolf pack causing trouble. Scare them off, file a report, and get back. Don't mess this one up, Benny. Don't mess this one up." That's what everyone kept telling me. Like, I plan to mess things up in Florida. Who expects panthers to be that good at opening cage doors? The hunting lodge sat in a valley surrounded by tall pine trees that looked like black fingers against the gray sky. Smoke came from the chimney, which was good because it meant people were still alive in there. I'd been told 12 hunters were trapped inside by an aggressive wolf pack, probably city folks who'd never seen a real wild animal before. I parked the truck and grabbed my gear bag. Inside was everything I thought I'd need. An air horn to scare the wolves, some tranquilizer darts, though I grabbed the wrong size in my hurry, and a radio that had been making weird crackling sounds since I left town. I also had my dad's old survival manual from the 1970 seconds, which had worked fine in Florida swamps but probably wasn't much good for Alaska winters. The lodge was bigger than I expected, built from thick logs with small windows. Before I could knock, the door swung open. A big man with a beard and expensive hunting clothes grabbed my arm and pulled me inside. "Thank God you're here," he said. "I'm Robert Mills. We've been trapped for 3 days." Inside, 11 other hunters sat around a big fireplace. They all looked scared, which seemed weird for a group of guys who came up here to hunt bears and moose. These were grown men with expensive rifles and fancy outdoor gear, but they jumped every time the wind made the lodge creak. "So where's this wolf pack?" I asked, setting down my gear and trying to look more confident than I felt. The hunters all looked at each other. Finally, a thin man with glasses spoke up. "They're not normal wolves, Ranger. They're bigger. And they talk." I almost laughed. "Wolves don't talk, sir. You're probably hearing their howls," and a sound came from outside that made everyone freeze. It started like a wolf howl, low and lonely, but then it changed. It became words. Clear, human words with what sounded like a British accent. "Ranger Crowkiller, we know you're here. Come outside and we can discuss this like civilized beings." The air horn slipped from my hands and clattered on the wooden floor. In the sudden silence, I could hear my heart beating way too fast. Wolves definitely don't talk, and they definitely don't know people's names. "How do they know my name?" I whispered to the room. Robert Mills walked to one of the small windows and carefully looked outside. "They know everything about us. Our names, where we're from, what we do for work. That's how we know they're not normal animals." The voice came, again from the darkness beyond the lodge. "Mr. Crowkiller, I am Professor Nathaniel Grimthorne. I was once a man like you. Perhaps we might have a conversation?" I grabbed the radio and tried to call for backup, but all I got was static and weird crackling sounds. The other rangers were too far away anyway. Whatever was happening here, I was on my own with a bunch of scared hunters and equipment that barely worked. "What happened to the 12th hunter?" I asked quietly. The men around the fire shifted uncomfortably. Finally, Mills spoke up. "Tommy Briggs went outside yesterday morning to check the generator. We heard him screaming for about 10 seconds, then nothing. When we looked outside later, there was blood in the snow, but no body." A different voice called from outside, this one with a southern accent. "Y'all got any more coffee in there? It's mighty cold out here." "That's impossible," I muttered. "Wolves don't drink coffee." "These ain't wolves," said a hunter with a thick mustache. "Look at the tracks around the lodge. Go on, look." Against my better judgment, I went to the window. In the snow around the building, I could see footprints that made my stomach drop. They looked like wolf paws, but they were huge, bigger than my whole hand, and some of them showed what looked like toes instead of claws. "We think there are 5 of them," Mills said. "They showed up 3 days ago and surrounded the lodge. They don't attack during the day, just circle around and watch us. But at night, as if on cue, something heavy landed on the roof above us. Everyone grabbed their rifles and pointed them at the ceiling. Snow and dust fell down as whatever it was walked across the roof with heavy footsteps. "Good evening, gentlemen," came the British voice again, now from directly overhead. "I do hope you're all comfortable down there." I looked around at the hunters. These were tough guys who'd probably faced down grizzly bears, without blinking, but now they were all pale and shaking. Whatever was up there scared them more than anything they'd ever seen. "What do you want?" I called up to the ceiling. "Ah, the ranger speaks. Excellent. I want what any professor wants, Mr. Crowkiller. I want to learn. You see, my colleagues and I have been studying human behavior for quite some time now. Your hunters here have provided fascinating data on fear responses and group dynamics under stress." The thing on the roof moved again, and I heard other sounds from around the lodge, footsteps in the snow, scratching at the walls, and what sounded like low laughter. "There are more of them," whispered one of the hunters. "They're surrounding us again." I tried to think of what to do. My training manual said that aggressive wolves should be scared off with loud noises and shows of dominance. I grabbed my air horn and headed for the door. "Don't go out there." Mills grabbed my arm. That's what Tommy did, but I was already opening the door. I stepped onto the porch, raised the air horn, and gave it a long, loud blast that echoed through the valley. The sound that came back made me wish I'd stayed in Florida with the alligators. 5 shapes moved out of the tree line and walked toward the lodge. In the moonlight, I could see they weren't wolves at all. They stood upright like men, but they were covered in dark fur and had long snouts full of teeth. Their eyes reflected the light like a dog's, but there was something human in them. Intelligence and humor that animals don't have. The biggest one, who had to be Professor Grimthorne, stopped about 20 feet from the porch. He was wearing the torn remains of what looked like a tweed jacket. "Ingenious strategy, Mr. Crowkiller," he said in that cultured British accent. "Use loud noise to attract all of us at once. Most prey animals try to hide or run. You've brought us all together for a proper introduction." I still had the air horn in my hand, but it suddenly seemed like a very stupid idea. These things were bigger than bears and talked like college professors. What exactly was I supposed to do now? "What are you?" I managed to ask. Professor Grimthorne smiled, showing way too many sharp teeth. "We are what you might call evolved beings, Mr. Crowkiller. Enhanced, improved. We retain all of our human intelligence and knowledge, but we've gained so much more." One of the other creatures laughed. "Tell him about the hunt, Professor." "Ah, yes, the hunt. You see, we've grown rather bored with ordinary prey. Deer and elk require no strategy, no planning. But humans present a challenge worthy of our abilities." I backed toward the lodge door, but I could hear the hunters inside arguing about whether to let me back in. "We've been having such fun with your friends here," Grimthorne continued. 3 days of psychological pressure, and already they've begun to turn on each other. Quite fascinating, really. That's when I made my second mistake of the evening. I tried to slam the door and run inside, but I tripped over my own feet and fell backward off the porch into the snow. The air horn flew out of my hands and landed somewhere in the darkness. The creatures all laughed, like this was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. I scrambled to my feet, covered in snow, and feeling like an idiot. The 5 creatures were still laughing at me, which was probably the most embarrassing moment of my life. Even the monsters thought I was a joke. "Oh my," Professor Grimthorne said, wiping what looked like a tear from his eye. "That was unexpected. Most humans either freeze in terror or attempt some form of tactical retreat. You simply fell down." The hunters had opened the door and were pulling me back inside the lodge. Once they got the door barred again, they all started yelling at me. "What were you thinking going out there? You could have gotten us all killed. Those things are smart. They're studying us." I sat by the fire, trying to get warm and figure out what had just happened. Nothing in my training had prepared me for talking wolf monsters that used to be college professors. My survival manual had a whole chapter on wolf behavior, but it didn't mention anything about creatures that quoted Shakespeare and wore the remains of academic clothing. "Tell me everything from the beginning," I said to Mills. He sat down across from me, his rifle still in his hands. "We came up here for a hunting trip, booked the lodge for a week. Everything was normal the first few days. We got a couple of deer, saw some moose tracks. Then, 3 nights ago, Tommy heard something outside, around midnight." "What kind of something?" "Voices. People talking outside the lodge. But when he looked out the window, there was nobody there. Just those tracks in the snow." Another hunter, a young guy who looked like he was about my due age, spoke up. "The next morning, we found our supplies had been moved around. Someone had gone through our food and organized it, but not like a bear would do. They'd sorted everything by type and stacked it neatly. That's when we knew something weird was going on," Mills continued. "Animals don't organize things, but we figured it was just someone playing a prank on us." "Then they started talking to us," the young hunter said. "The second night, they told us their names and what they used to do for work. Professor Grimthorne was a teacher at Oxford University in England. Dr. Sarah Chen was a surgeon from Seattle. There's a guy who used to be a military officer, another who was a lawyer, and one who worked for the government doing something classified. I tried to process this information. So they're all educated people who somehow turned into wolf monsters? That's what they told us. Said they were transformed during different research expeditions in Alaska over the past 30 years. Something about an ancient curse connected to this area. Outside, I could hear the creatures moving around the lodge again. Sometimes one of them would scratch at the walls or make a comment about something they could smell inside. The worst part is how smart they are," Mills said. "They don't just attack like wild animals. They plan everything. Yesterday, they cut our phone line at exactly the moment when most people would be trying to call for help. They disabled our vehicles in a way that looks like normal mechanical failure. They know exactly how to keep us trapped without making it obvious to anyone who might find us later." I was starting to understand why these hunters were so scared. It was one thing to face a dangerous animal. You could predict what a bear or wolf might do. But these things thought like people, while having all the physical advantages of predators. A new voice called from outside, this one with a southern accent. "Hey, Ranger boy, you dropped something out here." Through the window, I could see one of the creatures holding my air horn. It was examining the device with what looked like genuine curiosity. "Interesting tool," the voice continued. "Designed to produce loud, attention-getting sounds. But the frequency is all wrong for intimidating creatures with enhanced hearing. In fact, certain sounds can be quite painful for us." I sat up straighter. That sounded important. Professor Grimthorne's voice joined in. "Now, Marcus, don't go giving away our weaknesses. Where's the fun in that? Just being educational, Professor. Besides, I doubt our friend here is smart enough to figure out how to use that information." I should have been insulted, but instead I was thinking, enhanced hearing that made certain sounds painful? The lodge had an old stereo system in the corner that I'd noticed when I came in. If I could figure out the right frequency. "They're trying to get in your head," Mills warned me. "They've been doing this to us for 3 days. They tell us just enough to make us think we might have a chance. Then they prove they're always one step ahead." But I wasn't really listening anymore. I was staring at that old stereo and remembering something from my training. We'd learned about using recorded predator calls to manage wildlife behavior. Different animals responded to different sound frequencies. I walked over to the stereo and started looking through the old CDs stacked next to it. Most of them were country music and classic rock from the 1980 seconds. But there were a few that might work. "What are you doing?" asked the young hunter. "Probably something stupid," I admitted. But stupid seems to be the only thing that surprises them. I found a CD of death metal music and put it in the player. The first song was so loud and harsh that even I had to cover my ears when it started. Outside, there was immediate howling and sounds of the creatures running away from the lodge. "Turn it off," Mills shouted. "They'll hear it." "That's the point," I yelled back over the music. For the first time in 3 days, The area around the lodge was quiet except for the music. The creatures had retreated back into the trees. But I knew they'd be back, probably with a plan to deal with the sound. "Nice work, Ranger," Mills said when I finally turned off the music. "But what do we do when they figure out how to disable the power?" I looked around at the 11 scared hunters and realized I had no idea. I'd accidentally found something that worked, but these creatures were too smart to fall for the same trick twice. That's when the lights went out. In the darkness, I could hear Professor Grimthorne laughing outside. "Well played, Mr. Crowkiller." His voice carried through the walls. That was genuinely unpleasant. But as you can see, we adapt quickly to new challenges. Someone found a flashlight, and another hunter lit some emergency candles. In the flickering light, everyone looked even more scared than before. "They cut the power lines," Mills said grimly. "The generator's probably next." As if they'd heard him, the sound of the backup generator outside sputtered and died. Now our only light came from the fire and a few candles. "Gentlemen," Professor Grimthorne called out, "I believe it's time we concluded this little experiment. You've provided excellent data on human stress responses and group dynamics under pressure. But the research phase is over." I heard movement outside, not just footsteps, but what sounded like them positioning themselves around the lodge for an attack. "Mr. Crowkiller," the professor continued, "I'm particularly interested in you. Your responses have been unique. Most humans in your situation would either panic or attempt some form of organized defense. Instead, you seem to stumble randomly from one accident to another, yet somehow achieve unexpected results. It's quite fascinating." One of the creatures scratched at the door, and I could see the wood starting to splinter. These things were strong enough to break through if they wanted to. "I have a proposition for you," Grimthorne said. "Join us willingly, and I'll make the transformation quick and painless. You'll retain your human memories and intelligence, but gain strength, speed, and senses beyond anything you can imagine. Think of it as an academic upgrade." "What about the others?" I called back. "Oh, they've served their purpose. Their data has been collected. But you represent something new. A form of intelligence I've never encountered before." The scratching at the door got louder. Around the room, the hunters were checking their weapons. But I could tell they'd mostly given up hope. "You have 1 minute to decide, Mr. Crowkiller," Professor Grimthorne said. That's when I noticed something weird. The old radio in my gear bag was making those crackling sounds again, but now it seemed to follow a pattern. Every time it crackled, I could hear one of the creatures outside make a small noise, like the sound hurt them. I picked up the radio and tried different frequencies. When I hit the emergency channel, all the creatures outside suddenly howled in pain, and I could hear them moving away from the lodge. "The radio," I shouted to the others. "The frequency hurts them." But before I could explain more, something crashed through one of the small windows. Dr. Chen, the one who used to be a surgeon, landed inside the lodge in an explosion of glass and snow. She was smaller than Professor Grimthorne, but her teeth and claws looked just as deadly. In the candlelight, I could see that she still wore a torn medical coat over her fur. "Excellent acoustics discovery," she said in a calm voice that was terrifying because it sounded so normal. "But you see, we've learned to tolerate pain when necessary." 2 of the hunters shot at her, but she moved faster than anything that size should be able to move. The bullets hit the wall behind where she'd been standing. "Reflexes enhanced beyond human limits," she explained as she grabbed one of the hunters. "Muscle density increased by approximately 300%. Pain tolerance dramatically improved through conditioning." The hunter she'd grabbed was Robert Mills. She held him up like he weighed nothing. "Now then," Professor Grimthorne's voice came from outside. "Shall we discuss terms, Mr. Crowkiller?" I still had the radio in my hands. Without really thinking about what I was doing, I started spinning through all the emergency frequencies as fast as I could. The crackling sounds became a constant harsh noise that filled the lodge. Dr. Chen dropped Mills and covered her ears, howling in pain. Outside, I could hear the other creatures backing away from the lodge again. "Interesting," Professor Grimthorne called out, his voice strained. "But how long can your battery last, I wonder?" He was right. The radio was already starting to weaken, but it had given me an idea, a really stupid idea that was so crazy it might actually work. "Mills," I shouted. Do you have any more of those CDs? What? Music CDs. Heavy metal, death metal, anything loud and harsh. He pointed to a box in the corner. Tommy brought his whole collection. I ran to the box and started looking through dozens of CDs. Metallica, Black Sabbath, something called Cannibal Corpse that looked promising. What's your plan? Mills asked. I don't have one, I admitted. But these things are too smart to beat with a real plan. So I'm going to do something so stupid they won't see it coming. I started putting CDs into the stereo, but without power, it wouldn't work. Then I remembered, most of the hunters had portable CD players for when they were camping. Give me every portable music player you have. I told them. 5 minutes later, I had 4 different portable CD players, all loaded with the loudest, most annoying music Tommy had brought. I set them to different volumes and put them in different parts of the lodge. Dr. Chen was still covering her ears, trying to deal with the radio noise, when I started all 4 CD players at once. The combination of sounds was horrible, death metal mixed with the radio static, all echoing around the lodge at different volumes and rhythms. It was so bad that even the hunters were covering their ears. But outside, the howling told me it was working. Enough! Professor Grimthorne's voice was full of rage now instead of amusement. You want to play games with sound, Mr. Crowkiller? Let's see how you handle this. Something huge hit the front door hard enough to crack the heavy wooden frame. The door exploded inward, and Professor Grimthorne burst into the lodge. Up close, he was even more terrifying than I'd imagined. He stood, nearly 7 feet tall, covered in dark fur, with the intelligent eyes of a man and the teeth of something that was definitely not human. But what struck me most was that he was covering his ears and seemed to be in genuine pain from all the noise. Turn it off, he roared. All of it. Instead, I grabbed another CD player and turned it up louder. The combination of death metal, radio static, and whatever horrible music Tommy had collected was now so loud that it hurt my own ears. Professor Grimthorne staggered toward me, but the sound was affecting his balance. Dr. Chen had collapsed completely, curled up in a ball with her hands over her ears. You don't understand what you're dealing with. Grimthorne shouted over the noise. We are the products of advanced research. We represent the future of human evolution. No, I shouted back. You're just really smart wolves who are sensitive to loud noises. I don't know why I said that. It just popped out of my mouth. But Professor Grimthorne stopped moving toward me and stared. Smart wolves? He repeated. Yeah, you think you're all sophisticated with your British accent and your fancy words, but you're just animals that learn to talk. This was possibly the stupidest thing I'd ever said to anything, but Professor Grimthorne looked like I'd slapped him. I have a PhD from Oxford University, he snarled. I've published over 40 papers on anthropological linguistics. I am not a smart wolf. Then how come you can't figure out how to turn off a bunch of CD players? I asked. For a moment, Professor Grimthorne looked genuinely confused. He stared at the CD players like he was seeing them for the first time. That's when I realized something important. These creatures were so smart, they thought there had to be some complicated solution to everything. They couldn't imagine that the answer might be as simple as hitting the off buttons. While he was staring at the CD players, trying to figure out some complex way to stop them, I walked over and started turning them off one by one. The sudden quiet was almost as shocking as the noise had been. There, I said, see? Sometimes the simplest solution is the right one. Professor Grimthorne looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Then he started laughing, not the cruel laughter from before, but something that sounded almost human. Remarkable, he said quietly. Absolutely remarkable. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Turned off some music players? No, Mr. Crowkiller. You've solved a puzzle that we've been trying to solve for 30 years. He walked over to one of the chairs by the fire and sat down heavily. Dr. Chen slowly uncurled from her ball on the floor and looked around like she was waking up from a dream. What puzzle? I asked. The curse, Doctor. Chen said in a voice that sounded different, more human somehow. We've been trying to break it for decades. We thought it required some complex ritual or scientific solution. But it didn't, Professor Grimthorne continued. It required someone capable of the simplest possible thinking, someone who could see the obvious solution that our enhanced intelligence made us blind to. I looked around the lodge. The hunters were all staring at us like they couldn't believe what was happening. "I don't understand," I said. Professor Grimthorne was starting to change. His fur was getting shorter, his face was becoming more human, and when he spoke again, his voice sounded different. "The curse that transformed us could only be broken by someone who defeated us without trying to defeat us," he explained. "Someone who solved our puzzle by not trying to solve it. Someone who succeeded by failing so completely that success became the only option." Dr. Chen was changing too. Her claws were shrinking back into normal fingernails, and her torn medical coat was somehow mending itself. "We spent 30 years using our enhanced intelligence to find a cure," she said. "But the answer required normal human stupidity, the kind of obvious solution that only someone like you would stumble into." Around the lodge, the other 3 creatures were coming inside. They were all changing back into human form, looking confused and amazed. "So, what happens now?" I asked. Professor Grimthorne, who now looked like a regular man in his 50s, wearing a somewhat tattered tweed jacket, smiled at me. "Now, Mr. Crowkiller, you file a report about successfully relocating a troublesome wolf pack using innovative audio deterrent techniques. The hunters here will back up your story, and 5 people who have been missing for decades will quietly return to their lives with a remarkable story that no one will ever believe." "What about you?" Mills asked. "What will you do now?" Dr. Chen, now a normal-looking woman in a medical coat that was no longer torn, answered. "We'll find ways to use what we learned during our time as enhanced beings. Professor Grimthorne's research on human behavior under extreme conditions will be invaluable. My understanding of pain tolerance and physical limits will advance medical science. We'll find positive ways to apply our experiences." 3 weeks later, I was sitting in Supervisor Harris's office, receiving a commendation for innovative wildlife management techniques. "I have to admit, Crowkiller, I'm impressed," he said. "Whatever you did up there, it worked. No more reports of aggressive wolves in that area. The hunting party gave you glowing reviews. Said you saved their lives." "Just doing my job, sir." "Well, keep it up. I'm transferring you to an even more remote posting. There have been some unusual reports from the North Sector. Something about strange lights and missing hikers. Sounds like a job for our new expert in unusual predator situations." I nodded and tried to look confident. Truth was, I still had no idea how I'd solved the curse or saved those people. But apparently, sometimes being completely clueless was exactly the right qualification for the job. As I left the office, I thought about Professor Grimthorne's final words to me. "Sometimes, Mr. Crowkiller, the best defense against intelligence is perfect stupidity. You've proven there's genuine genius in being completely clueless." I wasn't sure if that was a compliment or an insult, but either way, it seemed to be working for me. 3 days later, I was driving toward another remote lodge where hikers had reported seeing strange lights in the sky. The radio crackled to life with reports of something unusual, and I couldn't help but smile. Whatever was waiting for me out there, it probably wouldn't expect someone who solved problems by accident and succeeded through complete incompetence. And somehow, that made me feel like maybe I was exactly the right person for the job after all. My name is Victoria Stormrider, and I've been a ranger in Alaska for 18 years. People always ask about my last name. It sounds made up, like something from a movie, but it's real. My grandfather was half Inuit, and that's what his people called him when he guided hunters through the worst storms anyone had ever seen. I wish I had his gift right now. I'm sitting in Ranger Station Echo 7, the most remote outpost in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. It's March 1997, and I'm supposed to be here for another 6 weeks, studying polar bear dens. The bears come here to have their babies, and with all the talk about climate change, we need to know how the warming weather affects them. The station is small, just 2 rooms with thick walls and triple-pane windows. I have a radio, a generator, enough food for 2 months, and a rifle I've never had to use. The nearest human being is 400 miles away. When the weather's good, a plane brings supplies once a month. When the weather's bad, which is most of the time, I'm completely alone. I love it out here. Most people think I'm crazy. But the silence is like medicine. No cars, no phones ringing, no people asking me to do things I don't want to do. Just me, the ice, and the bears. The bears are why I'm here. I've studied them my whole career, and I understand them better than I understand most people. They're smart. Smarter than people give them credit for. They remember things, they plan ahead, they have personalities, just like dogs or cats. But something's been different this year. It started 3 days ago. I was checking the den sites about 2 miles north of the station. That's when I saw the tracks. Polar bear tracks aren't unusual. That's the whole point of being here. But these tracks were wrong somehow. First, there were too many of them. I counted at least 30 different sets, all heading in the same direction. Polar bears don't travel in groups like that. They're loners, especially the males. They only come together to mate, and this isn't mating season. Second, the tracks were too organized. They weren't wandering around looking for food or following scent trails. They were walking in straight lines, like soldiers marching. The largest set of tracks was in front, and the others followed behind in neat rows. I've seen thousands of bear tracks in my life. I've never seen anything like this. I followed the tracks for about half a mile before they disappeared onto a stretch of hard-packed snow where the wind had blown everything smooth. But the direction they were heading worried me. They were going toward my station. That night, I radioed my supervisor in Fairbanks. I told him about the tracks, but I tried to sound casual. The last thing I wanted was for him to think I was going crazy from isolation. That happens to people out here sometimes. They start seeing things that aren't there, or they imagine patterns where there aren't any. Probably just a family group moving to better hunting, he said through the static. Keep an eye on it, but don't worry too much. Bears avoid humans when they can. He was right, of course. In all my years working with polar bears, I'd only had a few close encounters. They're curious about humans, but they're not usually aggressive, unless they're protecting cubs or they're really hungry. But that second night, I heard something that made me question everything I knew about polar bear behavior. I was getting ready for bed when I heard a sound outside. It was low and deep, like a bear calling to its cubs. But there was something different about it. It lasted too long, and it had a pattern to it, almost like someone was trying to talk. I went to the window and looked out. The moon was full, and the snow reflected the light like a mirror. I could see for miles in every direction. There was nothing out there. But the sound came again. This time, it seemed to come from multiple directions at once, different voices, all making the same strange call. I stood at the window for an hour, listening. The calls continued, always from different spots around the station. Sometimes they seemed to answer each other, like they were having a conversation. Bears don't have conversations, do they? The next morning, I found them. I stepped outside to check the weather equipment, and there they were, 7 polar bears, sitting in a perfect circle about 50 yards from my station, not lying down the way bears usually rest. Sitting upright, like dogs waiting for their master to come home, they were all looking at me. I froze. In all my years studying bears, I'd never seen behavior like this. Polar bears don't sit in circles, they don't coordinate their movements, and they definitely don't stare at humans like they're trying to figure something out. The largest bear was directly in front of me. He was huge, probably 12 feet tall if he stood up, with scars across his face that told the story of many fights. His black eyes were fixed on mine, and I had the strangest feeling that he was thinking about something. I backed slowly toward the door. I knew not to run or make sudden movements, but as I moved, the large bear tilted his head slightly, like he was curious about what I would do next. The other bears did the same thing. All of them, at exactly the same time. I made it inside and locked the door, though I knew that wouldn't stop a determined bear. My hands were shaking as I grabbed the radio. Base, this is Echo 7. I have a situation here. Go ahead, Victoria. What's your status? I have 7 polar bears outside my station. They're not acting normal. They're organized somehow. Static crackled for a few seconds. Did you say organized? They're sitting in a circle, watching the station. They've been there for at least an hour. Bears don't do this. Are you safe? Do you need evacuation? I looked out the window again. The bears hadn't moved. They were still sitting, still watching. I don't know. They haven't tried to get closer, but something's wrong here. This isn't normal bear behavior. Sit tight. We'll monitor your frequency. Call if the situation changes. I spent the rest of the day watching them through the windows. They didn't move, except to shift position slightly every few hours. They didn't hunt, didn't wander off to look for food, didn't do any of the things bears are supposed to do. They just watched. As the sun set, I saw more shapes moving across the ice in the distance. More bears, coming from all directions. By midnight, there were at least 20 of them arranged in wider circles around the station. I tried to radio base again, but all I got was static. Either the equipment was malfunctioning, or something was interfering with the signal. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I dozed off, I heard the calling again. Those low, organized sounds that were almost like language. They seemed to be coming from right outside the walls now. Around 3 in the morning, something hit the side of the station. Not hard enough to break anything, but hard enough to shake the building. Then something else hit the other side. I grabbed my rifle and went to the window. In the moonlight, I saw one of the bears standing on his hind legs, pressing his paws against the wall. He was feeling along the surface, like he was looking for something. He was looking for a way in. I tapped on the glass with the rifle barrel. The bear stopped and looked directly at me. For a moment, we stared at each other through the window. Then he dropped back down to all fours and walked away. But he didn't go far. He joined the others in their circle, and they all resumed their watch. I realized something that made my blood run cold. They weren't just watching the station randomly. They were taking turns. Some would rest while others kept watch. Some would patrol the perimeter while others stayed in position. They were standing guard. But what were they guarding against? Or were they keeping me from getting out? The next morning brought an answer I didn't want to believe. When I looked outside, I saw that the bears had arranged themselves in a very specific pattern. They formed a spiral leading from my station toward the north, where the ice met the ocean. They wanted me to follow them. Every instinct I had as a ranger told me not to go. But every instinct I had as a scientist told me I needed to understand what was happening. This behavior was unlike anything ever recorded. If I could document it, if I could figure out what was causing it, it might change everything we knew about polar bear intelligence. I put on my winter gear, grabbed my rifle and camera, and stepped outside. The bears watched me approach, but they didn't move. The largest one, the one with the scars, stood up as I got closer. He was even bigger than I'd thought. When he stood on his hind legs, he towered over me like a giant white mountain. But he didn't attack. He just looked at me for a long moment, then turned and walked toward the north. After a few steps, he stopped and looked back. He wanted me to follow him. Against every rule I'd ever learned about wildlife safety, I did. Following the bears across the ice was the strangest experience of my life. They moved in formation around me, some ahead, some behind, some on each side. I was walking in the middle of a polar bear convoy, and none of them seemed interested in eating me. They were protecting me. From what? We walked for about 2 miles before I started to understand. As we got closer to the ocean, I began to see things that didn't make sense. There were patterns in the snow, geometric shapes that looked almost like symbols. They were too precise to be natural, but too big to have been made by humans. The bears had made them. I stopped to take pictures, and the large bear, I'd started thinking of him as the leader, came back to see what I was doing. He looked at my camera, then at the symbols in the snow, then back at me. I had the crazy idea that he was trying to tell me something. "What is this?" I asked him, feeling ridiculous for talking to a bear. "What are you trying to show me?" He tilted his head and made a low sound. Not the organized calling I'd heard before, but something softer, almost gentle. Then he continued walking. We reached the edge of the ice shelf, where the frozen ocean met open water. The other bears spread out in a line, all of them looking out at the dark sea. They were waiting for something. That's when I heard it, a sound coming from under the water. It was deep and rhythmic, like a heartbeat, but too slow and too loud to be from any animal I knew. The bears all turned their heads toward the sound, and several of them answered with their own calls. Something was down there, something big. The leader approached me again. This time, he moved very slowly and carefully, the way you might approach a frightened animal. He stopped about 3 feet away and sat down. Then he did something that made me drop my camera. He spoke. Not in English, obviously, but he made sounds that weren't bear sounds. They had the rhythm and tone of language, rising and falling like sentences, with pauses in the right places. He was trying to communicate with me. I stared at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. Bears don't talk. They can't talk. Their vocal cords aren't designed for it, and their brains don't have the capacity for language. But this bear was definitely trying to tell me something. I fumbled for my camera and managed to turn on the recording function. The leader seemed to understand what I was doing. He repeated the sounds, speaking more slowly and clearly. Other bears joined in, creating a chorus of almost language. That's when my radio crackled to life. Victoria. The voice was distorted by static, but I could understand it. Victoria, can you hear us? I grabbed the radio. Bass? Bass, is that you? I can hear you, but barely. I'm with the bears. They're trying to talk to me. Victoria, you need to listen carefully. What you're experiencing is not normal bear behavior. I know that. I've been studying bears for 18 years. They don't do any of this. No, you don't understand. We've been researching your reports. We found some old files. Files about that area. The static got worse, and I had to strain to hear. What kind of files? Inuit stories, from the 1800s. They called them Tuurngait, bear spirits, guardians of the ice. The radio went dead. I looked at the leader. He was still sitting patiently, watching me with those intelligent black eyes. Around us, the other bears had formed a protective circle. They weren't threatening me. They were protecting me from something else. Tuurngait, I said quietly. Every bear turned to look at me. The leader stood up and took a step closer. When he spoke this time, I swear, I heard something that sounded like yes. That's when I realized the truth. These weren't just polar bears acting strangely. These were something else entirely. Something that had been waiting in the Arctic for a very long time. And now they wanted something from me. The leader approached me again, moving so slowly I could have stepped away if I wanted to, but I didn't want to. Despite everything my training told me, I wasn't afraid of him anymore. He stopped when he was close enough to touch, then very gently placed one enormous paw on my arm. The moment his paw touched me, everything changed. Images flooded my mind, not like memories, but like I was actually there. I saw the Arctic as it had been hundreds of years ago, when the ice stretched farther and the water was colder. I saw Inuit hunters working with polar bears as partners, not prey. I saw the bears building the symbols I'd found in the snow, marking territories and leaving messages for each other. I saw what they were protecting. Deep under the ice, something ancient was sleeping, something that had been there since the glaciers first formed. The bears were its guardians, and they had been waiting for someone who could understand, someone who could help them. They had chosen me. The vision ended, and I found myself sitting on the ice with tears frozen to my cheeks. The leader was still touching my arm, but now I could feel something else, a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. He was sharing his strength with me. "What do you need me to do?" I asked. This time, his answer was perfectly clear, even though he didn't use words. I understood him as clearly as if he'd spoken English. I needed to go back to the station. I needed to destroy my research. And then I needed to make a choice that would change everything. The walk back to the station felt like a funeral march. The bears surrounded me again, but now I understood why. They weren't escorting me, they were saying goodbye. Each of them took turns approaching me, touching me briefly with their paws or nuzzles. I could feel their sadness, their hope, their desperate need for me to understand what they were asking. The leader stayed beside me the entire way. Every few minutes, he would look at me with those ancient eyes, and I would get flashes of images. I saw the ice melting. I saw polar bears struggling to find food as their hunting grounds disappeared. I saw the thing under the ice beginning to stir as the water warmed. But I also saw what would happen if I said yes to their request. I saw myself changing, becoming something between human and bear. I saw myself living in the Arctic forever, protecting the ancient sleeper, helping my new family survive. The changes coming to their world. I saw myself giving up everything I'd ever been. When we reached the station, the leader stopped. The other bears formed a circle around us, just like they had that first morning. But now I knew they weren't watching me. They were waiting. The leader looked toward my station, then back at me. His message was clear. The choice had to be made inside, alone. I walked to the door and turned back. 20 pairs of black eyes watched me with hope and fear. These incredible creatures had trusted me with their most important secret. They believed I might be the one to help them save their world. I went inside and sat down at my desk. All around me were the files I'd been working on for the past 5 years. Research about polar bear dens, feeding patterns, population changes, data that could help scientists understand how to protect the species. But the leader had shown me something else in our shared vision. He'd shown me government, officials looking at my research and seeing dollar signs, oil companies studying my maps and finding new places to drill, developers planning to build roads and facilities in areas I'd identified as critical habitat. My research wasn't going to save the bears, it was going to help destroy them faster. I turned on my computer and looked at 5 years of work. Then I looked out the window at the bears, waiting patiently in their circle. My radio crackled again. This time, the voice was perfectly clear. "Victoria, this is Dr. Martinez from the Wildlife Service. We've been trying to reach you for 2 days. Your reports about organized bear behavior have created quite a stir up here. We're sending a team to investigate. They should arrive within 24 hours. My blood went cold. A team of scientists and government officials coming to study the bears. Coming to document their intelligence and their organization. Coming to capture and dissect the secret that the Turanite had, guarded for centuries. Dr. Martinez, I need you to call off that team. I'm sorry, Victoria, but that's not possible. This could be the discovery of the century. Organized intelligence in polar bears could change everything we know about animal consciousness. You don't understand. This isn't something that should be studied. This is something that should be protected. Victoria, you're a scientist. You know the importance of documentation and research. We need to understand what's happening there." I looked out at the leader. He was watching the sky, and I knew somehow that he could sense the approaching aircraft, just like his ancestors had sensed approaching storms. "I understand," I told Dr. Martinez. "I understand perfectly." I turned off the radio and started deleting files. Every research note, every photo, every map I'd created over the past 5 years, I erased it all. My computer hummed and clicked as 5 years of my life's work disappeared, forever. But as I deleted each file, I felt something strange happening. The sadness I expected didn't come. Instead, I felt relief. I felt right. When the last file was gone, I went outside. The leader approached me immediately. He could sense what I'd done, and his approval washed over me like warm water. The other bears moved closer, forming a tighter circle. The leader placed his paw on my arm again, and this time the vision was different. This time, I saw myself as I would become, larger, stronger, covered in thick fur that would keep me warm in the worst storms. Still, human enough to understand both worlds, but bear enough to truly belong in this one. I saw myself protecting the secret sleeper under the ice for decades, maybe centuries. I saw myself guiding future researchers away from dangerous areas. I saw myself becoming a bridge between two species that needed each other to survive. "Yes," I said aloud, "I'll do it." The leader rumbled with satisfaction. The other bears began to call in their organized language, and this time I understood some of the words. They were welcoming me. They were celebrating. The transformation began immediately. Heat spread from where the leader touched me, flowing through my body like electricity. My vision became sharper. My hearing became more sensitive. I could smell things I'd never noticed before. The fear of small animals hiding under the snow, the approach of weather systems still hours away, the ancient scent of the sleeper far below the ice. I was becoming Turanite. The rescue team found Station Echo 7 empty but undamaged 3 days later. According to their official report, severe weather had caused equipment failures that disrupted radio communication. Ranger Victoria Stormrider was presumed to have attempted to walk to the emergency supply cache 12 miles north, despite clear protocols against leaving the station during a storm. Her body was never found. The search was called off after 2 weeks due to dangerous ice conditions. The truth is much simpler. I watched the helicopters arrive from a ridge 2 miles away, standing beside my new family. The leader, I'd learned his true name, was Nuka, which means strong one in the old language, kept one massive paw on my shoulder as the search teams combed through the empty station. They found nothing useful. I'd made sure of that. The transformation had taken 3 days to complete. I still looked human, mostly, but I was stronger now, faster. My skin had thickened to protect me from the cold, and my hair had changed from brown to white. Most importantly, I could understand the bears' language and speak it myself. I was their translator now, their bridge to the human world. Over the next few months, I learned how to live in 2 worlds at once. During the day, I traveled with the bears, learning their ancient knowledge and helping to protect the sleeping giant under the ice. At night, I sometimes used my radio to contact passing aircraft, guiding them away from sensitive areas. This is Arctic Flight Control. I would say, disguising my voice, "You are entering a restricted zone. Please alter course to heading 270. The pilots always obeyed. They had no idea they were talking to a woman who had become something more than human to save something older than civilization. I learned that there were others like me scattered across Alaska, rangers and researchers who had been chosen by different animal spirits to protect different parts of the wilderness. We formed a network of guardians, communicating through coded radio messages and secret meetings. The bears told me that the sleeper under the ice was waking up. Climate change was warming the water, and after thousands of years of sleep, the ancient one was beginning to stir. They didn't know what would happen when it woke up fully, but they knew it had to be protected until that moment came. My job was to make sure that humans stayed far away from the awakening site. It's been 10 months since my transformation. The government has officially declared me dead, and my family held a memorial service that I watched from a distant hilltop. I wanted to go to them, to explain what had happened, but Nuka convinced me that it would put them in danger. Some secrets are too important to share. I still miss my old life sometimes. I miss sleeping in a real bed and eating hot food and talking to other humans. But I've gained something more valuable than comfort. I've gained purpose. Yesterday, I prevented a mining company from setting up exploratory equipment directly above the sleeper's resting place. I simply appeared out of the snow, looked like a crazy hermit woman who'd been lost in the wilderness for months, and told them there was a gas leak in the area. They packed up and left within hours. Tomorrow, I'll guide a lost research team safely back to their base camp, making sure they never suspect that I'm anything other than an experienced local guide. I am Victoria Stormrider, and I am the guardian of the Arctic's greatest secret. I am human enough to understand both worlds and bear enough to protect what cannot protect itself. The ice remembers every promise, every betrayal. Some guardians watch from shadows, some from the spotlight. We protect what cannot protect itself, and we are always listening on the emergency frequencies, ready to help or to redirect, depending on what the situation requires. If you're planning research in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, remember that some areas are more dangerous than others. Some zones should be avoided entirely. Trust me, I know these lands better than anyone. And I am not alone.